Okay, good morning, everybody. We'll call the meeting to order. This is day 2 of the Colorado Parks and Wildlife Commission meeting, June Commission meeting. This is June 2nd, 2022. Welcome back to day 2. Thanks to everyone for most everyone for enjoying a site visit yesterday. Thank you to the local team for putting that together. I know those take logistical planning. So Brett, to you and the entire local team for that. Thank you very much. Very informative. And special thanks to the Surf Hotel for hosting us last night and for the great music on the lawn and just the opportunity to socialize. So thank you so much to them. So we're going to dive right in today. First thing we'll do is take roll. So Laura, I'll turn it to you.
Adams.
Present.
Bailey.
Here.
Lecca.
Here.
Garcia.
Present and accounted for.
Haskett. Not yet. May. Phillips.
Here.
Schaefer.
Here.
Touchton. Vardy.
Present.
Chair Hauser.
Here. Okay, thanks everybody. So we are on item 18, and this is a conversation about officer interest. And just by way of background, you all, thanks to Jake, based on some of the questions and comments, and we do have Commissioner Bailey out there. She'd ask a couple of questions as well, just about history of this process. I just want to thank Jake for helping pull together that chronology. And as you can see, it has been done a little bit different in the last couple of years, just depending on kind of the situation. And where we find ourselves today is there's no, the seats of chair and secretary are not contested. So they will simply move forward. We have 3 nominations for vice chair. So you'll have an opportunity to hear from each of them. And also want to just again remind the commission of the other leadership opportunities that the board has, or the commission has to consider. Again, there are 2 GOCO representatives from CBW. Currently, that is Commissioner Garcia and Commissioner Touchton. As Commissioner Garcia will continue on GOCO in a different capacity, we will replace that one. And the only 2 that are eligible are Commissioners Haskett and Blecka. So we'll resolve that between them or however we decide to do that. The Natural Areas Council has been represented well by Commissioner Adams. That is also technically up in terms of that's a 3-year term. So there's either an opportunity to say, hey, I'd like to continue, or if there's others that have an interest in that, we'll get to this later, but just kind of highlighting the opportunities that folks have to contribute. And then the Trails Committee as well. Commissioner Blecka has served on that. I don't know what the time frame on that is, Jake, but so open-ended. So another one, Commissioner Blecka, which wishes to continue or to hand that off to somebody, we can have that conversation as well. And then, of course, we're losing most of the Finance Committee, 2/3 of it at least, the current Finance Committee, and so that has been dutifully led by Commissioner Garcia. So that is a committee that works very closely with Justin, and there's an opportunity for a chair for that committee as well. So just keep that in mind as we go around and as you're interested in things, and we can do that somewhat organically, at least for those other slots, and attend to those in July. But if you're interested and just want to raise your hand or indicate or whatever on those as we get through the officer election, please keep those in mind. So I will turn it over to Jake really quickly just for process, if he'll outline the process that we're going to go through, and then we'll hear from the 3 individuals who are being considered for vice chair.
Sure thing. Time-wise, there's a ballot sitting on your desk right now. After the discussion of officer interest, we have a break at 10 o'clock. I think that the plan is for commissioners to Listen to the discussion of officer interest. At some point, fill out your ballot and place it in this ice bucket over here during the break at 10 o'clock. And then Laura and I will review the ballots, tally up the totals, and I'll let you know sooner rather than later if there will be a second round of the election. So it's a runoff election. If there are 6 votes for one candidate in round 1, the person receiving the 6 votes is the winner. If there is a 5-3-3 outcome in round 1, the person receiving 5 votes will be the winner, and there will be no second round because it's impossible to get to the second round with 2 people receiving 3 votes. The ballots are confidential as allowed by the open meetings law. That's sort of described in the notes from the chair. And I think that's it.
So thank you for that and outlining transparently the process that we'll go through. So if there's no objections, we'll just go in alphabetical order for those that are on the ballot currently. So we'll turn it to Commissioner Adams.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So this is an honor to be nominated. So thank you for those who nominated me for this role. This is my second time throwing my hat in the ring. And I think, or rather I know it is because I both care, am committed to this incredible agency and this commission. In my tenure, I have been honored to learn, unlearn, and relearn about an incredible amount of what this agency does. I think I really stand on the same things, or I'm running on the same principles that I ran on last year, which are around integrity, accountability, and transparency, with an eye of rebuilding and strengthening trust across diverse stakeholder groups, whether that be racial and ethnic groups, geographic, urban, rural, suburban, really with an eye towards building bridges, healing rifts, and building on the incredible strengths of this agency's legacy. Also, want to thank the fellow commissioners who are on the vice chair nomination as well. I have high respect and honor the contributions and skills and expertise that you bring. And regardless of however this vote ends, I feel confident that we will be in a position to continue to meet the increasing demands, not only of climate change, the ongoing pandemic, and just the other things that are calling us to be higher, do more, forgive more, be humble, and really center moving from solving problems to creating possibilities. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Adams. Commissioner Blecka.
Good morning. Thank you. And thank you for the nomination, however that happened. I truly don't have anything prepared, as in I didn't really think we were doing this. But with that being said, I'll just let my record and my participation on the commission speak for itself. And I've been dedicated to the agency for over 20 years as an employee or family, and now in this capacity. So much like what Commissioner Adams said, however this turns out, I think it's going to be fine either way. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Commissioner Blecka. Commissioner May.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I consider it a privilege to be on this commission. I think that this commission is probably the most diverse and well-rounded and passionate group of people I've ever worked with. I don't want that to change. I'm also thankful for the nomination. I would consider it an honor, but whether the election results go that way or any other way, it won't change how I deal on this commission. You know, I think we have one goal in mind, and that's to fulfill the mission that we have. And I feel confident that we will continue to do that. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you to the three of you. Commissioner Garcia.
Just a comment on, thank you, Jake, for the background. I never dawned on me that the secretary position was made up. And thanks for being secretary, Jake. You've done a great job. But, you know, it may be one, I would hope that this group down the road would consider some sort of bylaw amendment. I think, Jake, that would be appropriate to actually formalize that position, to make it more in line with what we've actually been doing, at least for the 4 years I've been here. And secondly, the finance committee. That's another invention of this group. And I would suggest strongly that the executive committee, maybe the entire commission, have an honest discussion about the need and the value of that committee. You know, this is an odd group. I mean, it never dawned on me until I became a commissioner. You know, we didn't have a treasurer, and I thought, boy, this is odd. And I don't think I've ever been on a board that didn't have a treasurer. Well, there's a reason that we don't have a treasurer. And so I would suggest that you sit down, particularly with Justin, and work with Justin around whether or not there truly is a need for such a committee. My gut tells me probably not. I think if you have a good chair, which you do, we know we have, a good vice chair, and I know we've got a good secretary, they can work with Justin to do all of the things that are necessary. So that's just my suggestion. I throw it out. Thank you.
Okay. And Commissioner Haskett, I think you were out the room when we first outlined this and just simply said, because there were not contested seats for chair and secretary, congratulations. And I would just also say, as a point of privilege, thank you for your confidence in me for another year as chair. And I will lean on many of you, as I have, and the whole of the commission, given the great lift we have over the course of the next year. So thank you to all of you as well. So you all have a ballot at your leisure. Please fill that out and get that to Jake on the break. And then we will share the results of that either right after the break if we need to have another step, or towards the end of our meeting today. Okay. Final quick thing, just as a note, many of us have experienced the WAFWA meeting, which is the Western Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies. You can say that 10 times. And the meeting is coming up in July in Oklahoma City. There are a few folks that were signed up to go in January, and that was canceled in Tucson for COVID. So there's been a little bit of outreach to those that had intended to go, but there is at least one spot that has been approved by DNR for just cost purposes. So if you have an interest in attending WAFWA and you can attend in summer, July, Oklahoma City, between July 10th and 15th, if you want to look at your calendars, and if you have some interest in that, if you just would let Heather know, and then she and I can chat about it, just so that we're protecting open meetings, please let her know. Okay. For those who've been, you might just chat with them before we end today. I think it's a really good experience. It's a really good education. There are 2 opportunities during the year to interface with WAFWA. So if the July meeting doesn't work, then obviously we'll have an opportunity in December. Don't know that we'll ever have an opportunity to send 4 again. So this will be a great opportunity just because we didn't have the expense in January. Okay. Okay. Thank you very much for that. So we'll move immediately for members of the public, we'll move to item number 19, which is license distribution, public engagement update. We'll turn it to Katie, Jonathan, and Mike.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Again, Katie Lanter, Policy and Planning Supervisor for Colorado Parks and Wildlife. And I am joined today virtually via Zoom by my colleagues, Mike Quartuch and Jonathan Boydston, to provide an update on the public engagement we've been doing, looking at how CPW distributes our limited licenses for big game hunting. Big game license distribution is a topic with significant implications for CPW and Colorado's big game hunters. Big game hunting is the single largest source of income for our wildlife programs. Hunting is also a part of our ungulate management to achieve our herd management objectives. And sports person interest in this topic is high. You may recall that we received over 10,000 responses to our comment form on this topic last year. That's about 3 times what we got for wolves in the same period. We know that big game hunting provides opportunity for hunters to appreciate Colorado's wildlife and landscapes, to fill their freezers, and to recreate with family and friends. As the commission may recall, in late 2020, the commission expressed interest in gathering public input on license distribution. The commission recognized growing interest in revisiting license distribution, particularly as it relates to preference points, allocation, and limitation. In spring of 2021, the division brought forward our proposed approach, which is displayed in this timeline slide. Last fall, we put out that comment form with the 10,000 responses, and that public input, along with data gathered from CPW staff through some staff focus groups, fed into the phase that we're currently in, phase 2. In this phase, we are conducting our big game attitude survey that Mike will tell you more about. He has about 15 minutes of information on that. And we also conducted public focus groups with resident and non-resident big game hunters, and Jonathan will tell you more about that process in about 10 minutes. We are presenting to the commission today because we think that you'll be interested in knowing more about what big game hunters are saying about their experiences with drawing licenses and hunting in Colorado. And this data also sets the stage for the next component of public engagement this summer, building towards bringing potential regulatory changes to the commission this fall, which is shown on the slide as phase 3. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Mike Kwartuch to tell you more about the big game attitude survey.
Hey, well, thank you, Madam Chair, directors and commissioners. My name is Mike Kwartuch. I'm the Human Dimensions Specialist with Policy and Planning. As Katie mentioned, I'm going to be sharing some preliminary results with you from the Big Game Attitude Survey today. But before diving in, I just wanted to take a second to acknowledge and thank the amazing team of 8 staff, some of which are in the room, others are online. They helped develop this survey. I learned a ton from them during this process, and there's no way this questionnaire would have been as robust without them. So next slide, please, Katie. So just a little bit of background. Prior to this Big Game Attitude Survey, the agency has typically surveyed hunters about every 5 years, and in part to understand hunting behaviors and preferences, but also to help inform our big game season structure. However, the last time we conducted the Big Game Attitude Survey was in 2014, and as you can imagine, a lot of the challenges that we're facing now are much different than they were 8 years ago. The 2014 survey was also about 53 questions, which is pretty long. And so our team this time around wanted to really tighten it up. And as a result, we developed 2 very specific and critical objectives that really guided this questionnaire. So the first objective is really going to provide the agency with important information specifically about resident and non-resident hunters' perceptions regarding things like Katie mentioned, license allocation, preference points, season structure, over-the-counter opportunities. The second objective is going to provide the agency with another snapshot about hunters' motivations, their experiences and satisfactions, and the other types of things that influence behavior and long-term retention. So for purposes of today's presentation, again, these are preliminary findings. Specifically, I'm going to present them as they relate to the first objective and some of those topics, those 4 kind of critical topics. But please keep in mind that results from this effort are going to be included in a final report in the coming months. Next slide. So to answer our objectives, we stratified our sample of 6,000 hunters into resident and non-resident, and then we kind of further divided that evenly across 3 different methods of take, kind of different strata of archery, muzzleloader, and rifle hunters. We mailed the survey to everyone in our sample in early March, and we sent a follow-up questionnaire in mid-April, and I sent several postcard reminders kind of along the way. Now, again, the survey just closed a few days ago, so we're still receiving completed questionnaires in the mail and online. But so far, Katie, next slide. We've received about 2,077 responses, and it's pretty wild. They're almost exactly split between resident and non-resident hunters right now. And then similarly, the percentage of respondents in each of those strata by methods of take are nearly identical. Next slide, Katie. So I have about 8 more slides of results after this, some figures and some tables, but I figured I'd start this presentation with the end in mind. And so what you're seeing on this slide are some of the big picture considerations or takeaways that we wanted to highlight for you today. So first, there were fairly large differences in opinion across resident and non-resident hunters in terms of what allocation or percentage split would be the fairest way to allocate licenses. However, both groups did express kind of similar levels of support for other alternatives to the allocation challenge. There were also some slight differences of opinion across these two groups about the importance of certain attributes that make up our preference point system, but overall, about half of all hunters who responded so far were satisfied with the way that the preference points are currently used. We're seeing some significant differences in resident, non-resident attitudes, specifically about this option of only allowing Colorado residents to be eligible for over-the-counter licenses. We also saw differences related to what hunters would prefer the agency address first if we were to do or consider anything related to OTC. And then lastly, in terms of season structure, we found that most hunters would prefer to hunt potentially larger deer and elk with maybe less crowding every 2 to 4 years, but the majority overall would prefer season lengths remain as they are now, essentially kind of a status quo preference. So next slide. So in this big game attitude survey, we included 4 questions about big game license allocation specifically. The first 2 looked at allocation from a position of fairness, and I'm going to show results from one of those. And I'm also going to highlight results from another question, which asked how much hunters would support or oppose kind of 3 pretty different alternatives to allocating big game licenses if the Parks and Wildlife Commission were to change our allocation rules and policies. Next slide, please, Katie. Okay, so maybe before you even peek at the results on this slide, I just want to kind of mention and reiterate how big game hunting licenses are currently allocated. So in high demand hunts, or hunts that require at least 6 preference points for the 3-year average of the 2007 to 2009 time period, they're currently allocated 80% to Colorado residents and 20% to non-residents. And then the remaining hunts, which require less than 6 preference points, are allocated 65% to Colorado residents and 35% to non-residents. And so here, as you can see on this slide, we asked this big picture question of, which alternative to allocation would be the fairest way to divvy up licenses to resident and non-resident hunters. And you can see, Katie, you can just click that the vast majority of non-residents believe that the 65-35 split, that percentage breakdown, would be the fairest way, versus only about 9% of residents who supported that. And then Katie, you can click again. In terms of resident hunters, we're seeing that about 61% so far indicated that that 80-20 split would actually be the fairest way. Another 22% though of resident hunters thought that a 75-25, so increasing a little bit, would also be the fairest. Next slide, please, Katie. Okay, so next we asked how much they would oppose or support kind of these 3 totally different alternatives. And working from the left, we're seeing that about less than half of non-resident hunters and about 1/3 of resident hunters are interested in expanding the current hybrid draw to include all deer, bear, elk, and pronghorn hunt codes. So there's some support for this, a little more from non-resident, but not a ton overall. The second, or this kind of middle alternative, it received even less support from that first one, with only about 1/3 of resident hunters and 37% of non-resident hunters supporting the idea of developing a totally new hybrid draw that uses different requirements or ways to allocate licenses. So some examples there would be like a lottery system or different preference points needed. And then Katie, if you can just click. So this third alternative though, on the far right, received the most support overall, with nearly half of all non-residents and 56% of resident hunters supporting this idea of having just one allocation split for all deer, elk, bear, and pronghorn hunt codes across the board. And so this again, a little bit more support here, and that's for having just 1% breakdown and split for those particular licenses. Next slide, please. So because we wanted to know what hunters valued about our current preference point system, we asked them to rank 4 different attributes of our system in terms of how important they were to hunters, specifically when they're gaining or using their preference points. So things like fairness and simplicity and predictability, what's important to you? And I'm going to highlight some results from this question. We also asked in the big game attitude survey how satisfied hunters were with the way the preference points are used to award different licenses. And then for hunters in that question who indicated maybe being dissatisfied, we asked them a follow-up question as an open-ended question to tell us why. What are some of the challenges there? Next slide, please, Katie. So when they rank these attributes of our current preference point system, we're seeing that about 41% of resident hunters identified fairness as the number one kind of most important attribute across the board. And that's followed then by kind of predictability and opportunity, maybe a bit of a distant second. Non-resident hunters identified predictability as the number one most important attribute, again, when they're considering using or gaining preference points. And this makes some intuitive sense. You know, they have a need to plan for an out-of-state hunting trip. However, fairness and opportunity to hunt in Colorado were also the most important attribute to about a third of non-resident hunters, so pretty close there. And this slide and some of these findings are really one example, I think at least, of where the qualitative data from our focus groups can provide some nuance here, because the focus groups help highlight why, like why certain things in this preference point system, for example, are important to hunters or why they're not important. So Jonathan will go into more detail from the focus group data. But one thing that we did see in the focus groups, and we're kind of seeing from the big game attitude survey, is that simplicity as an attribute of the preference point system just isn't overly important to hunters. Next slide, please, Katie. So when asked how satisfied they were with the current system, again, the one that's used to award specifically deer, elk, bear, and pronghorn licenses through the limited license drawing, we're seeing that more than half, slightly more than half of both resident and non-resident hunters were actually satisfied with this current system. But about 1/4 of hunters were dissatisfied. That's kind of an average between resident and non-resident. And so while I haven't coded those qualitative data, I did peek at them, and I've noticed some similar themes that are jumping out. These things were also discussed by focus group participants. So things like concerns about preference point creep, waiting or chasing tags forever, but never getting them, concerns with having to pay for weighted points, those types of things. Next slide, Katie. So in this kind of second to last topic I'm presenting on today, we asked 2 questions about the OTC licenses, and both of them actually focused on hunter support or opposition of 3 potential alternatives that the agencies heard about from the hunting public over time. Next slide. So one of these options is allowing only Colorado residents to be eligible for OTC licenses. As you can see, pretty stark differences here. About 84% of non-residents were opposed to this, versus 15% of residents were opposed. On that flip side, on the far right, we're seeing that about 3/4 of resident hunters were supportive of this potential alternative versus only 7% of non-resident. Next slide, Katie. So next, we kind of asked them, if you had to choose between those 3 options, if CPW were to consider one of these 3, which should we move forward with first? And about 2/3 of resident hunters, this kind of supports the previous slide, would prefer that we start considering or focusing on limiting OTC licenses to Coloradans, again, kind of similar to what we saw on that previous slide. And then interestingly, more than about half of non-resident hunters would prefer CPW consider limiting OTC rifle licenses, and that's versus about 21% of residents who supported that option. And then in that bottom kind of bar, about 1/3 of non-resident hunters think we should consider limiting archery OTC licenses first, compared to only about 13% of resident hunters. Next slide, Katie. So this is the last topic I'm presenting about today, the big game season structure. In total, we asked 5 questions about hunters' preferences related to season structure. 3 of those focused on a specific species, and the other 2 examined hunters' preferences in terms of season length. And so the first question that we asked, really kind of overall big picture, was which season length hunters would most prefer. And I don't have a slide for the results for this one, but I thought it was worth mentioning because overall about 60% of resident hunters and 72% of non-resident respondents prefer the season length to actually stay as it is now versus other options, things like having fewer but longer seasons or more but shorter seasons. Next slide, please. Okay, so this figure has a lot going on, but it highlights results from a question asking hunters if they prefer to hunt elk, deer, bear, and pronghorn kind of every year with potential to see smaller and younger animals versus every 2 to 4 years, possibly older animals with less crowding, or every 5 or more years, so more mature animals. And we're seeing somewhat similar trends here across species and across these 3 options. So Katie, can you just click forward, please? So for example, we're seeing the most support kind of right here in the middle. Over half of all hunters, resident and non-resident, are supportive for hunting deer and elk, specifically every 2 to 4 years. Katie, you can click forward. And then here we're just seeing less support overall for hunting kind of smaller animals every year, with between about a quarter and a third of resident hunters choosing this option for elk and deer, and even fewer non-resident hunters are selecting this option. And overall, if you're just looking at that option on the far right, very few would prefer to hunt every 5 or more years. So last slide, Katie. So in summary, and to reiterate, these are preliminary considerations, but so far we are seeing in terms of license allocation that the percent split, it's likely to be contentious across resident and non-resident hunters, but there is some nuance in opinions here about this topic. For example, we're seeing some similarity in support for other approaches to allocating licenses, things like having one split. This is also something we heard in the focus groups, but specifically in the context of trying multiple things, not just having one kind of perfect solution. We're also learning from the BGAS, the Big Game Attitude Survey, that predictability or being able to plan your hunt, fairness, these are all important to hunters. But we're also seeing that about half of all respondents were satisfied with our current preference point system. And so Jonathan will talk a little bit more about some of that. We're definitely seeing very differences in opinion about that OTC option of allowing only residents to be eligible for these licenses. But if CPW were to consider, doing anything or looking into something, non-residents would actually prefer that the agency focus on limiting OTC rifle license versus residents, who would prefer that we consider limiting OTC to only residents. So another sticking point or area of contention. And then lastly, most hunters would prefer to hunt deer and elk every 2 to 4 years for more and potentially larger animals, kind of with less crowding. And so with that, I can turn it over to Jonathan or take questions however you choose.
Great, thanks, Mike. I'll go ahead and get started. Thanks, Mike, and good morning, commissioners, chair, acting director, everybody else there. I'm Jonathan Boydston, Public Involvement Planning Specialist for CPW. As mentioned, we recently held public focus groups regarding big game license distribution. These were small group discussions with between 5 and 10 individuals in each group, with a goal to analyze current big game license distribution systems and especially potential changes to those systems. 10 public focus groups were held both in person across the state and also virtually. Half of the focus groups were dedicated to the topic of license allocation, and half were dedicated to the topic of preference points. We held one preference point and one license allocation focus group in each region of the state, each CPW region, and one each with non-residents virtually as well. Members of the public volunteered to participate in a focus group through an online comment form. Individuals were selected by staff to reflect diverse interests and backgrounds. The participants selected represented varying levels of hunting experience. Outfitters and guides were also selected for participation based on their unique viewpoint on non-resident allocation. And participants also reflected a diversity of ages and gender. Next slide, Katie. When facilitating the focus groups, we first posed discussion questions to participants to gauge what they're experiencing while hunting and also how they navigate the license distribution systems. When asked about hunting experience, a majority of participants pointed to overcrowding as a top concern. Overcrowding associated with other hunters, as well as overcrowding associated with other recreation user groups. Beyond the effect of overcrowding on hunter success, there was also concern about the impact of increased hunter and outdoor recreation pressure and how that affects herd health as well. When asked about navigating license distribution systems, a common theme discussed was opportunity. This is what Mike was getting into, talking about fairness and predictability and opportunity and simplicity. Opportunity, I would say, really rose to the top in a lot of the focus groups. Opportunity was often described as the chance to draw licenses that have become increasingly difficult to obtain for different reasons. Additionally, hunters indicated that opportunity for new hunters to draw sought-after licenses is something that we should consider. Other participants described opportunity as the ability to hunt frequently from year to year. Next slide, Katie. Participants were asked to share their ideas about potential changes to the license distribution system that were then discussed by the group. After all the ideas were shared, CPW facilitators then polled the group, asking them to indicate the top 3 ideas they wanted to discuss in greater detail. These ideas, I'll present today were selected by multiple focus groups as one of their top ideas for potential changes. I should note, though, that participants suggested several potential changes that we don't have time to highlight today. Those additional ideas, though, will be discussed in a more comprehensive written report that I'll provide soon. The first potential change I want to discuss today is limiting over-the-counter licenses for non-residents or both non-residents and residents. Capping or completely eliminating over-the-counter licenses was discussed as a potential change, in both the license allocation and preference point focus groups. In our focus groups with residents, there was debate about limiting OTC licenses for both residents and non-residents versus just limiting for non-residents. Many resident participants voiced support for limiting only non-resident OTC licenses, though some residents also felt that resident OTC licenses should be limited as well. Meanwhile, non-resident participants largely felt that OTC licenses should continue to be offered in the manner they are currently. Potential benefits of limiting OTC licenses discussed included decreasing crowding in OTC units, increased opportunity for residents if non-resident OTC was limited, reduction in point creep as more people use preference points to obtain licenses, and also increased data on hunting pressure or improved data. A drawback of the strategy, however, would be less opportunity for those hunters who do not draw a limited license. Next slide, please. Great. Participants suggested several potential changes to the preference point system. In particular, we have the preference point focus groups. One of the top ideas from multiple focus groups was requiring preference points to be used for more licenses as a way to reduce point creep. For example, preference points could be required for a secondary draw and reissued licenses, landowner vouchers, and for even second, third, or fourth choice in the primary draw. Such a change would require hunters to use more points more frequently, which could help address point creep. However, there was debate about how effective this change would be. It may only be an incremental improvement. It could also impact harvest if licenses go unsold because hunters are not willing to use points on less desirable hunts. There will also likely be less applicants in the secondary draw if you require points to be used in the secondary draw. Multiple focus groups also raised the idea of expanding CPW's hybrid draw or creating a different split draw system, if you will, like other states have. CPW's hybrid draw and the split draw model used in some other states essentially makes some of the licenses available through a random drawing. Our hybrid draw that we have right now allows hunters who have 5 or more preference points to enter a random drawing for elk, deer, pronghorn, and bear that require those hunt codes that require 10 or more points to draw. One idea would be to expand the hybrid draw by including more hunt codes and or increase the percentages of licenses allocated to the hybrid draw. Other split draw models from other states have split license distribution methods, which may be completely random or may utilize preference points in different ways. In Arizona, for example, which has a split draw model, there's 50% of the licenses which go to the highest preference point holders, and then 50% are allocated through bonus points, which is sort of like a name in the hat approach. The main benefit of expanding CPW's hybrid draw or creating a new split draw would be to improve hunter opportunity, particularly for lower point holders and new hunters. However, high point holders may draw fewer tags under this approach. Next slide, please. Great. One more slide on preference point changes. Point banking was also discussed at several focus groups. Point banking allows hunters to use only the number of points needed to draw the license instead of all of their points. This strategy was actually implemented here in Colorado in 2006. It was just for 1 year. Hunters were able to use just the number of points required plus 1 additional point that year. Although point banking could help to address point creep by allowing high point holders to use some of their points each year, it may also have an unintended consequence of causing more point creep for typically low to medium point hunt codes as more hunters apply for those hunt codes. Multiple focus groups also suggested that averaging group points would be another way to address point creep. This approach of averaging group points would allow high point holders to increase the draw odds for those in their group with fewer points. This would be another way to incentivize individuals to use their points. However, there was concern voiced that this could create a market for buying people's points or increase the number of overall applications as more non-hunting family members, for example, would start applying to gain points to increase the group's average. Next slide. Great. Finally, focus groups also spent time discussing potential changes to license allocation between resident and non-residents. While there were similar suggestions by non-residents and residents in the preference point focus groups, there was much greater disagreement between the two groups regarding changes to license allocation. Non-residents strongly favored the status quo for license allocation split percentages, similar to wanting status quo OTC license availability. Residents, meanwhile, were generally more in favor of changing the license allocation splits to benefit residents, though there was some pushback from residents to that, particularly from outfitters and guides. Residents also expressed support for updating the 3 years, or the years used in the 3-year average, for preference points, the 3-year preference point average is used to determine allocation splits. Although several participants supported changing the license allocation system to benefit residents, many noted unintended consequence of decreasing non-resident allocation. For example, participants spoke about the economic impact of communities that often cater to non-resident hunters and decreased revenue for CPW from fewer purchases of non-resident licenses. Next slide, please. Great, some key takeaways from focus groups here. Before I wrap up, I wanted to highlight a few of these key takeaways that kind of rose to the top from all of the focus groups, really. Most focus groups identified top ideas supported by a majority of the group, but there was an understanding that each change has unintended consequences and that no single change will address all concerns. Rather, participants often proposed a suite of changes that would need to be implemented in tandem. Multiple changes may need to be implemented at the same time to improve the effectiveness of the change. For example, point banking may need to be implemented at the same time as requiring points to be used for the 2nd through 4th choices in the primary draw or in the secondary draw, or a change might need to be implemented to offset the unintended impact on certain groups, such as creating an outfitter preference system if non-resident allocation decreases. Happy to discuss more examples of that if you wish. With that, I'll hand it back over to Katie Lanter to discuss next steps. Thanks.
Thanks, Jonathan, and thanks, Mike. As I noted at the beginning, we have ongoing public engagement planned, building towards potentially bringing regulatory changes to the commission this fall for consideration. In our focus groups, we clearly heard that hunters wanted to consider packages, if you will, of changes that is looking comprehensively at limitation, preference points, and allocation. There will be opportunities to do that this summer in public meetings and stakeholder workshops. That we'll also put together comprehensive reports summarizing what we heard in the comment forms last year, the focus groups, and the Big Game Attitude Survey, and we'll share that with the commission and the public. We know that license distribution is a complicated topic. If the commission is interested, we could schedule a workshop in early August to help increase understanding about license distribution in advance of bringing forward regulatory alternatives in September. And if the commission takes final action on regulatory changes in November, I just wanted to remind you that whether those regulatory changes would be effective in the 2023 big game seasons or afterwards would depend on the complexity of those changes. That does conclude our presentation to you. We welcome your reflections and thoughts on next steps. I'll also mention we're joined on Zoom by some of our colleagues who helped to do the focus groups with us, and also from our licensing section who could help answer some of the questions as well. And there is also public comment on this item, both virtually and in the room. So you just let me know when you'd like that as well.
Okay, so I think we'll turn to the commission first, and then we do have quite a few. And I just want to say thank you to several folks who've traveled great distances to be here for public comment. It's nice to see that process happen again and for us to be back in person. So I'll start with the commission. We'll go Commissioner Haskett and then Commissioner Blecka.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Would it be possible for you to share the survey that you that these questions came from? Because some of this is confusing to me. One of the questions was it was on page 12 of the PowerPoint of fairness. I'm not sure exactly what you mean by that.
In response to your first question, yes, we can share the survey. And Mike, do you want to talk more about the second part? Mike, are you there?
I am. Sorry about that, Katie. I was actually trying to bring up the questionnaire so I could respond more appropriately. Yeah, it's a great question. So what we wanted to do with a lot of this survey is 30,000 foot this, right? These are really complex topics, and we just didn't want to assume that every hunter we'd send it to would know so much as like the focus group participants, for example. They were incredibly knowledgeable. And so what we asked Commissioner Haskett for this question, in terms of the preference points, when we asked them to rank, when you're thinking about gaining or using your preference points, what do you consider? Like, what are the factors that you think about? And so the fairness one, we gave an example for all of those. So predictability, fairness, simplicity, and opportunity. And the fairness way we described it is, those who have waited in line the longest should draw a particular license first. So something like predictability, we described it as the ability to plan and predict when you could draw a particular license. Simplicity, we described as the system that's used to draw preference points. It's clear and easy to understand. And then I just want to mention the last one, opportunity, is that every applicant has a realistic opportunity to draw a particular license in their lifetime. And to your question, though, I think one of the reasons perhaps that non-residents identified predictability as being really high in the survey, and fairness a little lower, is that they might be conflating those two things. Like being able to predict when they can draw a license as a non-resident, they might view that as part of fairness. So I think we had maybe some overlap there, but that's how we described it in the questionnaire. And I'm happy to share it absolutely with the commissioners.
Okay. And on preference points, I do like the idea of the banking and the sharing. I think we've talked about that before, 1 year, or we did it for 1 year before, but it really doesn't give you any idea of what happens if you don't do it for more than 1 year. So that's all. Thank you.
And I would just say that was consistent with what we heard in the focus groups where there was interest in banking, was that it should be for some, probably predetermined amount of time so people can plan around that. And yeah, that we heard feedback on that 1 year was not enough time.
Okay, Commissioner Blecka.
Hi, good morning. Real quick, I guess, and maybe this is something that you're going to do down the road, but was there any inclusion in this part of your research or your surveying about people's feelings on like economic impacts to this, or what that looks like if we reduce non-resident numbers and have to look at that? Thank you.
Maybe I can start and Mike and Jonathan can chime in, but yeah, I mean, certainly, especially in the focus groups, there were, as Jonathan mentioned, concerns about what would be the, financial impacts perhaps to local communities that see, a lot of hunters coming in the fall. If we make changes, is that going to have ripple effects in those economies? And then also just concerns about what happens to, CPW's finances. If we were to make this change, I mentioned at the beginning that, this is a big moneymaker for us, in particular, the non-resident licenses. And so I think that's part of it, is if we're doing the outreach this summer and we're finding support for, particular changes, when we bring that to you in the fall, we would want to also have information about what we think would be the financial implications of doing that.
Thank you so much. I look forward to that. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Schaefer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I've got a few comments. First, thanks. That's a great presentation from all of you. And it sounds as if remarkable response rate that I would have never guessed. And so that's very heartening to see that folks want to engage in this process in a really good faith manner. I will say just a few things here in regards to what was mentioned as part of the questions. I'll start with the OTC thing, because I think that is where a lot of the attention is being paid, particularly from non-residents, which makes a ton of sense. I will say, from my perspective, over-the-counter licensing ends up being problematic even more so over time. And why I say that is, we're trying to manage based upon our herd management plans, along with all of the various inputs that happen on an annual and biannual and so on basis, to not be able to have a regimented approach to dealing with hunter harvest ends up undermining the work of our herd management plans in some way, shape, or form. I also think that one of the difficulties in a process like this is people are predicating their beliefs and expectations on recent history. And so they're basing, the opportunity around over-the-counter licenses or limited licenses on the herd dynamics that they've seen over the last couple of decades. I think it's dangerous to assume that we are going to be able to manage for populations the way that we did 20 years ago, 20 years from now, let alone, in the next few years. There's a lot of new variables that are in play that, frankly, the agency can't control. That's something that I think that, I hope more folks recognize that particular dynamic while providing input as part of this process. But that is something that's just constantly in the back of my mind, is that it's not just resetting expectations in regards to the demand of this particular product and the increase of, 750,000 people or 750,000 applications coming in on an annual basis almost. And that's seemingly not ceasing anytime in the near term future, but also the fact that, the land itself, that this place, the habitat has changed greatly. It just in the last couple of decades, and will continue to do so. So understanding that particular dynamic may not lead to the desired outcomes based upon the policy solutions here is something that I just really want to try to impart to folks on a broader basis. And I think that also goes to the sort of questions or maybe suggestions that were provided regarding season structure. You're predicating things in the past that may not be that way. I also just want to sort of reinforce, I think, Commissioner Blecka's point that both season structure and allocations have a disproportionate impact on rural communities. It is the primary sustainable economic driver for a lot of rural communities. It's a place where businesses can actually plan for, to the greatest degree possible, to get the majority of their revenue in a 2-month time frame. Changing any aspect of this will have impacts upon those local businesses and local communities. And that needs to be taken into account as part of this larger conversation, not just the agency finances, but I think also the role this agency plays in aiding, rural Colorado. So I hope that we will be able to conduct specific outreach in some of those communities to be able to get folks' thoughts, understanding that isn't the only driver here, but it is one that everyone needs to be cognizant of. And finally, the last thing that Katie's heard me say ad nauseum, but it's one where the draw itself, I think, is a really important mechanism when it comes to preference points. It has everything, as this focus group and presenters remarked upon, everything has unintended and intended consequences. There's not a thread that you pull that doesn't pull another one. But ultimately, if we're going to have a preference point system, we have got to make it be less inflationary, frankly. We've got to create a better level of fairness and predictability. A great example is just a couple of years ago, we had several deer units that jumped 6 points in a single year. And it's because of the supply and demand aspect to it. But part of it is that we've got to, increase the opportunity aspect to it and get folks to understand that the opportunity is the primary driver, and a handful of units that require an outrageous amount of points. Folks need to realize that, you might not ever draw that. Do you want to hunt? Do you want to, participate in this outdoor endeavor and experience? Or do you want to just buy points on an annual basis and hope that 35 years from now that you get a chance? That's something that is the push and pull within this. And I think that the draw itself can promote more engagement and opportunity while pulling more points from the system itself. And I think, Arizona was mentioned in this, and sort of their split hybrid model that I really like from that particular aspect. So finally, I'll just say, I really appreciate the work that staff has done on this. This is not easy. It will not be easy moving forward. It'll get worse in a lot of different ways. But this is really important work that I think is also reflecting the desires of a lot of folks. A lot of the hunters and anglers, particularly the hunters, resident hunters, who were really frustrated with, some of the status quo. And I think that this process is reflective of the agency listening and acting accordingly to trying to address those concerns. So thanks.
Any comments, response to Commissioner Schaefer? I think those were mostly comments by him. Thank you very much for that, Commissioner Adams, and then Commissioner Touchton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you for this incredible presentation. I echo the fiscal comments of Commissioner Blecka, and not only the comments, the fiscal impacts of those who are the communities that are impacted, but also those who are paying for, especially from a non-resident and resident perspective. As some of you know, I am an emerging hunter, late stage or whatever it's called, and just the fiscal impact of even just applying was something I wasn't expecting, and is also could be a barrier. So I just wanted to lift that up as well. Always appreciate the opportunity to do the social dimensions type work. And I am hopeful that in the next round, because it was my understanding that this particular survey did not ask about, it sounds like the primary dimension, demographic information that was requested was whether you were resident or non-resident.
We did collect other demographic information. Mike, do you want to talk about that?
I do, yeah, thanks. No, we did. I actually use, and I'll be using this throughout in surveys. We use the Colorado Office of Health Equity within CDPHE has recommendations, for example, for measuring race ethnicity. So we use their metrics, which are really solid. It expands the options, which is good. We asked about age. We also asked, let me just check really quick so I don't give the wrong information. So we asked age, we asked with what gender you identify, if they're a resident or not, and then again, kind of race and ethnicity. Those were the four.
Thank you for that. And I was just curious, especially as it related to race, not race, actually, to age, because I had some curiosities around if those who had higher preference points felt differently. Like, I'm curious what, like, I would like to see the data disaggregated by those who have higher point allocations versus those who don't. I'd also be curious, and it sounds like there wasn't any demographic information pulled geographically. So I would be curious to know if, how rural people responded to this survey versus urban folks responding to this survey. And so those are just some follow-ups, and I'm happy to hear that there is additional information. So perhaps at the next session or at the updated, it would be helpful to hear some of that disaggregation. I'm also curious about the race and gender disaggregation. And then I was curious for the focus groups if there were some more intentionality. So in addition to the come to us strategies of or traditional focus groups and stakeholder workshops, if there were opportunities to potentially partner with some of our existing partners to have them host group sessions that we actually go to. So for example, Backcountry Hunters and Anglers, of course, Hunters of Color. I'm curious, I think there's some women hunting groups in the area, and I would be curious to hear not only from those who are in Colorado, but maybe even some of the national groups, many of whom come to Colorado to hunt. So I'd be curious about that, as well as people with disabilities, specifically specifically physical disabilities. Again, very helpful to hear if there's additional barriers or considerations from some of those specific stakeholder groups. And I also wanted to echo the importance of perhaps having some focus groups specific to rural businesses. And going back to, as another add-on for the economic impacts, and perhaps even the county commissioners and maybe going to one of their meetings, but essentially kind of balancing out a come to us versus a go to them. I'm also curious how we can use and leverage existing tabling. So for example, Colorado Parks and Wildlife had a table at Outdoor Retailer. They had a table at the International Sportsman's Expo. So again, how we can leverage those in-person times, not only to gather anecdotals, but also maybe to have like a little box. So people just put their little coins in the box since they're there. This is also an incredible educational opportunity as well when we are going to where people already are versus asking them to come to us. And so again, really appreciative. So I'm just looking to see if I got all of the pieces there. Urban Rural Server. Oh, and then lastly, I'm hopeful that you are open to considering interviews in addition to focus groups. Oftentimes, or rather sometimes, focus groups can be limiting in folks being able to be truly honest, especially if it's a group of people that don't know each other, don't have a trust established to be able to speak. And unfortunately, we have seen research, the validity and reliability of previous studies come into question because there was, challenges in the focus group interviewer, for example, not being a part of the community. So they were not truthful around what was happening, what their experiences were, or what their recommendations are. So again, having racial, ethnic, gender diversity in the folks who are asking the questions also really matters as well. And I'm hopeful that our team is considering those additional mechanisms and strategies to ensure that we have strong reliability and validity for the results. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Commissioner Adams. In terms of, I appreciate you and Commissioner Schaefer highlighting the need to, bring back information about what we're hearing from local communities. So certainly wanting to do that as well. And what you're talking about in terms of going to communities, that is what we were thinking about with the stakeholder workshop. So yeah, less asking them to come to us, more of us going to them. And then for the public meetings themselves, we are thinking about doing some, if not all of those, as virtual meetings, again, to kind of improve accessibility of those opportunities to people. I will note I'm currently filling one of our 2 public involvement specialist positions. Jonathan has been doing a fantastic job, but it was more or less, we don't have ourselves fully staffed up to be doing this outreach. So I just wanted to maybe manage expectations. We will absolutely do our best, but we are a little bit down in staffing right now as well.
Okay, state of the world, right? Thank you for that. Thank you for those comments, Commissioner Touchton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As I read the materials, it seemed like the primary objection to over-the-counter licenses was crowding and a reduced quality of the hunting experience. But I have a different concern that might be more biological than hunter satisfaction. I think Commissioner Schaefer was saying something along these lines, but I'd like information, again, my simplistic understanding is, when we go to set hunting licenses, we have to determine our population, determine the amount of animals that can be taken and keep the population where we want it to go. Then we got to know about our hunter success rate. And then finally, we got to know about how many hunters. And having over-the-counter licenses seems to make that a lot harder because then we don't know how many hunters will be out there. And I was just struck, I don't apply for hunting licenses, but I did apply for a Christmas tree permit. And in an era where forests probably really could use some thinning, we have a limited license on Christmas tree permits. And so it just struck me that why is it harder for me to go get a Christmas tree than to go get a cow elk? And so anyway, part of this process for me would be knowing biologically what's going to happen, because I am intrigued by the idea of moving away from over-the-counter licenses? Because I think it might make Brian's job easier, but he might tell me something different. So anyway, thank you.
But Brian, thank you.
Good morning, Madam Chair, Directors, Commissioners, Brian Dreher, Terrestrial Section Manager. So I want to start just, I think some background will really help. So although we offer elk licenses as over the counter, there still is one limitation that's really important. And that is that we require any hunter hunting with an over the counter license to harvest a bull elk that has 4 or more points on a side. And so there is a level of limitation, and that limitation is on what animal that they can actually take. And that is the biological filter that exists. Typically, our archery licenses are either sex. Success rates are low, so we can harvest some cow elk on those archery licenses. All of our cow elk licenses for rifle are fully limited, which we have 100% control over. And so the biological limitation that exists is the ability for hunters to harvest a legal bull. And that limitation allows us to allow for over-the-counter hunting, because essentially we protect yearling bulls, spikes, and those animals will then be recruited into the population and become the next year's 2.5-year-old bulls, which will then largely be 4-point bulls and then legal. So there is a limitation when we talk about this. When we talk about over-the-counter hunting in general, and I think what we're hearing a lot of is more of a social issue. There's a lot of hunters on the landscape. They're moving elk, all of these issues, but it's important to note that, because yes, I think on the surface, you would say, how in the world can you sustain over-the-counter hunting? Well, we can sustain it because we have that limitation on the bull that could be harvested. Does that make sense? And so that's an important distinction.
Thanks, Brian. No, that really makes sense to me. What about the other, like, I assume we have an antler tine limitation for deer, but what about like pronghorn, bear, some of the other over-the-counter licenses?
So over-the-counter licenses, when we're talking about this for the nature of the survey, all deer licenses are fully limited, except for one small hunt that we have in the southeast west of I-25 for whitetails. That's over the counter. The rest are fully limited. Pronghorn rifle license is fully limited. We do have a handful of areas, particularly on the Eastern Plains, where we do allow archery, either sex licenses being unlimited. And then, of course, we talked about bear at the last one as well. But for the most part, when we're talking about limitation, and I guess that's a good thing to discuss, we're primarily talking about over-the-counter elk hunting. It is really largely what we're discussing. You bet.
We'll go to Doug Vilsack and then Commissioner Haskett.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Katie, or maybe this is for Mike. It sounds like there'll be future rounds of stakeholder outreach and focus groups and things like that. Will there be additional surveying in the future as well? And just kind of for context, some of the numbers that we got back, particularly, from residents about their excitement about getting rid of non-resident OTC and things like that. I think without that lens of, hey, this is what this will do to your prices, it's not the most helpful information, because I know some of those changes would have pretty huge impacts on the cost of an over-the-counter tag for residents, for example. So.
Yeah, thank you for that question, Doug. Actually, in combination with doing the public meetings and the stakeholder workshops this summer, we also wanted to, basically have another comment form opportunity. We actually kind of broke our comment form last fall with the number of responses. And we are actually just now getting a new web portal. It's the same one we've actually been using for our wolf engagement, offered by a company called Granicus and Bang the Table. It's called Engagement HQ. So we're looking at using that here as well, because luckily there's no cap there on the number of responses. So that will be another portal where people can share their thoughts on this as we kind of move towards the fall.
Great. That sounds good. Yeah, I just think that lens of price, even if it's just, does your perception of these changes change, if your elk tag is going to be 2 times or 3 times more expensive as a resident? I mean, I think that's just a huge factor from our experiences with the Future Generations Act.
Yeah. And there was discussion in the focus groups about whether there should be changes in the tag prices for resident or non-resident. We make clear that, some of that is, statutory. We can make the CPI adjustments, but, larger changes would require, essentially going back to the legislature. So, I mean, that is important to keep in mind as well. If there are going to be significant fiscal impacts, is that something that maybe you say, would DNR want to go back to the General Assembly to seek a change in order to make some of the other kind of system-wide changes that are associated?
I mean, maybe not to get out ahead of the game. I mean, I think the answer to that is it's always difficult to go to the legislature to change resident license prices, but I think we can't take those two conversations apart from one another. I mean, at the end of the day, I think if the commission votes on changes to the allocation structure, you need to know exactly, to maintain the amount of revenue we have coming in, to maintain the hunting opportunity, we need to know what those changes will be. I mean, I really think those two conversations are part of the same conversation. So if this commission is going to approve something like that, it needs to know that it needs to be ready to go to the residents and the legislature and justify that change as well.
Makes sense.
Okay, Commissioner Haskett and then Commissioner Bailey.
Before you leave, Doug, I want you to add to that of how long it took us to get future generations and how long it was between fee increases the last time.
Jeff may be able to know. I think it was 2005 was the last time, maybe before we got a resident license fee increase through. But it took, 2015, 2016, I think was the start of the financial sustainability conversation, CPW, at least to address it. I know there were cuts made before that. And then two times through the legislature. And I think the first time around, there were kind of more broader increases proposed, with the ability for CPW to raise fees up to, I think, 50% over resident prices. And that was not taken very well. And so we dialed back in 2018 and kind of went back to this, we're going to increase your price by $8, which was, 10, 15% increase. So I think probably some of these options, like getting rid of non-resident OTC or drastic limitations on non-resident license sales, would be much more than that. I mean, we looked at some of those numbers when Senate Bill 21-150 came out, which kind of led to some of these conversations. And again, we should dig into this and get spreadsheets out. And Katie's been deep into that. But just to be clear up front, I mean, there'll be some pretty big increases that would need to be made, I think, to resident license fees if we kind of clamp down on non-resident tags. So.
Okay. Yeah, I don't think people realize that the economic side of this, it's not just CPW, it's huge for the communities out there. It's $1 billion industry in Colorado. And like Outfitters and Guides, they make most of their money within 60 days. That it lasts the entire year, and it goes back into those communities. You mentioned something earlier and I forgot to hit on that. I think the workshop for the commissioners will be vital. I'm really disappointed Luke is not going to be here. He brought this up, but he has a lot of insight into this, and knowing the system, we have an extremely complicated system to start with, is huge. So we definitely need some workshops on that, is to teach the rest of the commissioners about the system. And I'm curious if you can ask a question of, one of the things that I've heard, and your survey kind of goes that way, archery season, we have areas that are not draw and we have areas that are over the counter, and those over the counter areas have had increased pressure. Have you asked or thought about asking the question of what if archery was to go all draw versus having it split between the state? I do think that Commissioner Schaefer hit on it. We are headed towards all draw at some point. We just can't continue. Our supply and demand does not meet anymore. So somewhere down the road, I think we are headed that direction, and maybe with the archery season, that's a place to start. I don't really know for sure. I think that's all I have for now. I'll wait till after public comment. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mike, I think we did ask about the archery going fully limited, although I don't know if that was just resident and non-resident.
Yeah, in the part of the big game season structure questions, we asked 2 questions specifically about whether respondents agreed or disagreed with statements kind of describing their elk hunting season. And the first statement was that over-the-counter either sex archery elk licenses should be replaced with over-the-counter antlered archery licenses. So we have an agree, disagree there. And then the other statement was that over-the-counter antlered elk licenses should continue to be offered during the 2nd and 3rd rifle season. So not exactly what Commissioner Haskett's talking about, but I wanted to mention that.
If I can also mention, we talked quite a bit at the focus groups, both allocation and preference point, about limiting over-the-counter licenses. And there were many participants who brought up overcrowding related to archery specifically, or at least during the archery season, perhaps from archery hunters plus from other recreation user groups. And even though that was brought up pretty regularly, overcrowding during archery and the split with the muzzleloader season as well, there were, I would say, hardly any, if any, comments to the effect of limiting over-the-counter archery specifically. The participants in the focus groups really were focusing on limiting or capping over-the-counter for more broadly for either everybody, all methods of take, or perhaps just non-residents, but still all methods of take. People did not differentiate between limiting rifle and limiting archery in the focus groups.
And I just wanted to add this, this doesn't answer your question, Commissioner Haskett, but this will become more clear, I think, when I send the survey instrument to you. We do have 2 questions about the archery muzzleloader season overlap. And so we asked about concern regarding hunter safety, and then we asked if we were to make changes, could you rank these out with respect to that issue? So I just wanted to mention it.
Okay, well, Commissioner Bailey and then Commissioner Schaefer, and we do have public comment waiting, so we'll hopefully go to that next. Commissioner Bailey.
Yeah, thanks so much. And yeah, thanks to everybody for all the hard work that's been done to pull this data together. And I'm excited to see the survey instrument. This is kind of logistical and also maybe historical and contextual. I was wondering both if and when was the last time we did something similar where we collected data at this scale, focus group surveys, et cetera, that might have influenced any changes that happened. And then related, as was mentioned, there are unintended consequences. There are things we're going to need to reassess and look at in the future. And so I wondered what might a future timeline for making changes or collecting additional data at this scale look like as well.
Mike, I think you have some of that history in terms of similar survey instruments. There may be others who've been with the agency longer. I don't know that we've really done focus groups like this before. I mean, I didn't have any historical information, but if others do, please chime in.
Katie, I was just going to mention, thanks, Commissioner Bailey. So the last time we did the attitude survey was in 2014, and actually there was another one, I think in 2008. I'll look into that for you. But it was a little different. They've all kind of taken slightly different stints. And then I did want to mention, Katie, so not maybe for these topics holistically, but for the last big game season structure, I think, and Danielle or maybe John Frano, others could probably talk to this, maybe Brian. We did focus groups, maybe not to this extent. And again, it wasn't specifically around these topics, but we did do focus groups for the big game season structure, not this license distribution kind of topic holistically.
Yeah, and we did do some telephone town halls for that last BGSS as well, that I remember.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Schaefer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. One thing was mentioned earlier that I can't remember now, all of 12 minutes later. What was there general support about including bear and pronghorn within the allocation process?
Yeah, I'll see if Mike and Jonathan want to chime in too. That might be clear from the survey result. I mean, it seemed like we were in the focus groups. I would say that we were primarily talking about deer and elk, to a lesser extent pronghorn and bear. But yeah, Mike or Jonathan, if you want to add in, go ahead.
I don't recall too much discussion in the focus groups about to that point. It might have been raised by 1 or 2 participants, but not many.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, Commissioner Schaefer, we did ask again, kind of in that big game season structure set of questions. We asked 1 about pronghorn hunting seasons and 3 about bear hunting seasons. I don't know that it speaks to what you're talking about, but you'll see it for sure in that bigger report.
That's great. I mean, I just got worried there for a second because those are apples and oranges. And so, while we have sort of there's a necessity of having simplify this as much as possible in terms of the questions, just talking about things as over-the-counter licensing. There's vastly different scenarios depending on the species in question that we're talking about that I think, end up having a lot of different consequences. And so it does seem as if we are mainly talking about deer and elk. I will say that as I understand it, which very well could be wrong, we don't include pronghorn within our 80, 20, 65, 35 in the same manner that we do deer and elk. Am I wrong, Brian?
Thank you for the question. You're going to hit me. I believe it was just deer and elk when they put the 80-20 limitation on, but I can check.
I believe, if my memory serves, that is the way, but it's one where I think, looking at things holistically, all of these opportunities at this time makes a ton of sense. Just understanding that, the majority of folks are focusing on a couple of species, and there's a vastly different scenario to doing things in Southeast Colorado, for instance, versus Northwest Colorado. So I just wanted to highlight that. Thank you.
To your early comments, though, as it relates to bear and pronghorn in general, bear, we were only in the second year of the over-the-counter hunting with the big game season structures that were just adopted, and pronghorn hunting over the counter, again, primarily on the Eastern Plains. And when you look at just participation rates in general, it is not terribly high. We can pull those numbers so you can take a look at them. But the bottom line is, I think that really makes the focus, again, since deer is totally limited, this really is in a large way an elk issue.
Commissioner Haskett.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just have one other question, and I'm not sure who can answer this, but I think I remember seeing our resident hunter number applications have gone down every year for the last couple of years. Is that right?
Actually, my colleague John Frano from licensing, I think, was going to add something, and he's probably a good one to answer that question as well. So John, are you there?
I am here. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
All right, perfect. I just wanted to jump in. Our current regulations are for deer and elk for those 35, 65, 80, 20. Just to clarify that one that was asked. And then for the other one, yes and no. From the small portions that I've pulled for resident comparison, non-resident comparison, we're pretty much holding our own. I wouldn't say that there's any drastic drops, but we are not seeing drastic increases either. So I'll give you yes and no on that one.
Okay, Commissioner Phillips.
I'll be super brief, but the notion of a workshop to go over this for the commissioners, I think would be super helpful, especially because we're losing Commissioner Schaefer, who knows it all. But it is, a lot of it still is kind of over my head, so I'd be a huge proponent of that.
Yeah, I think we did a couple of years ago, and I see some clapping up there on the screen. We would be glad to be students of that, and we did this a couple of years ago, and I think for a lot of us it was really helpful. It is very, very complicated, and lots of history around it, and super helpful. So I don't know what that symbol is exactly. Like, I think it's
Mike's hand raised.
I think it's a hang 10.
It does look different up there.
I'm gonna leave it at that.
I apologize. I meant to.
Okay,
I
with
meant
that, we will go to public comments because we've got. Oh, sorry. Oh, sorry. I thought sorry, emojis.
That's okay.
Go ahead. Sorry, I guess that was a hand raised. We'll just take it that way.
It was. Thanks, Madam Chair. I just wanted to, Commissioner Bailey had a second part of her question. I wanted to just quickly respond about like, what is the appropriate time frame then to re-engage and look at these things? And if the commission decides to make changes, when do we do that? And I just wanted to mention that we'll absolutely take that into consideration. And it's something that in the focus groups we heard from resident and non-resident participants that said, you know, if and when you do make changes, please involve us. And so I think the clearly communicating with these audiences is going to be critical. And, you know, they had talked about, they didn't come up with a time frame. I think in the focus groups, Jonathan, specifically, I'm thinking about that Springs one, but certainly if we try changes, you know, make it a reasonable amount of time and then please report back. Don't make changes and then kind of rapidly do it and change it on us again. So that was heard.
Okay, thank you. Sorry to members of the public. There may not have been some context for that. Let's try and manage. Okay, so I think we'll go to public comments. We have two, at least, that were signed up virtually, and then we have several in the room. So we'll get to you momentarily. So Katie, if you'll invite our public commenters who are online. Thanks.
Yes, thank you. So far we just have one logged in online. So if we could go ahead and get Lane Walter unmuted. And Lane, would you like your camera on?
Sure. Is that working?
All right. You might have to hit accept on your end.
I believe I hit accept. Can you hear me?
Yep, we can. So just for everyone, yeah, we can see you now. Great. And everyone who's providing comments will have 3 minutes. I'll give you a warning at 15 seconds and time's up. And after Lane here in the room, we'll have Bill Wilson. So if Bill wants to come up and take a seat next to me while we're hearing from Lane, that's fine as well. Lane, go ahead.
Awesome. First, I want to say thank you for everybody taking the time to look into this. This is something I've been trying to get something to happen with for the past couple of years. I want to say thanks to Brian, and I apologize for the pit in your stomach that comes up every time you hear me come up to talk about something. I like a lot of everything that's going on in this, and I just like to put my input into this, into the commission. I was one of the members of one of the focus groups, and I would like to thank everybody for the opportunity to do that. I think a big thing that's getting talked about is the economic side of this and the economic impact. But I think that the residents' economic impact in these small communities is being undersold. I spend a lot of time and a lot of money in these communities whenever I'm out hunting. And I think that should be something that should be considered as well. As far as making up for limiting the over-the-counter tags or anything like that, I think that we are still falling short on the resident side of things and how much we're paying for. I'm lucky enough and I prioritize my life to where I can hunt all over the country, and I've hunted in different parts of the world. I do that all on a firefighter salary. I don't make a lot of money, but I just prioritize where my time and my money is spent. A lot of these people that are going to complain about a tag increase fee or a point fee are the same people who are spending $5 every single day on coffee and a lot of other frivolous stuff. If you want to do it, then I think that a lot of people can prioritize their time and money and make this happen to where it's not going to be as much of an impact as what everybody likes to complain about. I think the one good thing or downside to hunters too is that we hate the way things are, but we also like to complain about the changes that are going to happen. So I do want to thank you guys for putting up with all of that as to what's going on. As far as some of the points that were made, I really like the point sharing idea. The drawback that was outlined is something that I think would be very small and almost frivolous and something that would be easy to curb. There's a lot of other states that are doing this, and I think that would be a very beneficial thing for Colorado. As far as eliminating like a rifle or archery over-the-counter unit, I don't think that would work at all. I think if we're going to eliminate one, we got to eliminate both. Because if you eliminate the archery, it's going to push those people into the over-the-counter hunts. And if you eliminate the rifle, it's going to push those people into the archery hunts and just cause more overcrowding in that unit. The point banking, I could go either way on. I think one of the biggest things here is just doing on what's best for the wildlife and focusing on that. And then what comes best for the hunter should be put second. As far as the fairness, there's been a lot of fairness talk on here about different things, fairness for non-residents, but what about what's fair for the resident? I apply for almost every single other Western state. And the largest proportion for non-resident tags that I apply for outside is 20%, and Colorado's still giving 35%. Other states have limited the over-the-counter tags for non-residents and kept over-the-counter for residents. It's worked well, and I would love to see Colorado do that well. I really appreciate you taking the time to listen to me about this.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Walter, and you never have to apologize for providing public comment to us. That's why we're here, and thank you very much for your time.
All right, so next up, we will have Bill Wilson, followed by Ray David.
Madam Chair, members of the commission, thanks for this opportunity to speak to you today. I'm new at this and I'm pretty nervous, so please bear with me. I'm an outfitter from Norwood, Colorado. My name is Bill Wilson. Been in business since 2002, family-run operation. We outfit in Unit 70, 61 being in the middle of that, and 62 to the north. When they went to the draw archery, in most units south of 70, that included Unit 70 and most units south. Unit 61 is completely draw, which is a trophy unit, as you all know. And Unit 62 is pretty much over the counter for the archery. When they went to that draw, it flooded Unit 65 from the hunter, or Unit 62, excuse me, the one to the north, with hunters that were over the counter. So that's just an issue there. And listening here, you're all going to deal well with it, because personally think the only way to fix it is go complete draw. But with what's being talked here, you're all going to get all the information and figure it out, I'm pretty sure. But anyway, that's an issue. I don't know if it impacted the harvest or not in 62 by getting that many more hunters in there. But just from the hunters I spoke with, that was the issue there. I want to talk a little bit also about non-resident, resident. We understand that non-residents pay for 70% of the budget for the CPW. And I think over the years, if you think about what the non-resident has contributed to the state, you look at all the Division of Wildlife lands that's been purchased, I'm sure a lot of that has come from the non-resident hunter. And they pay so much more for their licenses, as we all know. But what I just didn't want to see was the non-resident get shortchanged here. In 61, where I operate, I think over 90% of that land is public land. That belongs as much to the non-resident as it does to me. And I just, with what you guys all decide later on here, I just didn't want you to shortchange the non-resident, because they sure contribute a lot to our state Division of Wildlife and Parks. So I don't think my 3 minutes is up, but I'm pretty much done. So if anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you so much for making the trip. Questions, comments? Mr. Wilson, you did great.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for being here.
I'll be seeing you.
Okay.
Next up, we'll have Ray David, followed by Bill Canterbury. So Ray, if you want to take a seat.
Good morning, Madam Chairman and the committee. I'm kind of like Bill. I'm a little on the nervous side too. I wear a couple of hats today. I'm part of the Colorado Outfitters Association. I'm also an outfitter, and we also run livestock sheep over in Unit 62. I like that word fairness. As an outfitter, as the organization, and as an outfitter, if we can be fair, we've accomplished something. We can't always treat everybody equal, because if we did that, we'd be talking 50-50 on these allocations, but that's not going to work. But I ask one more favor: keep the damn politicians and the legislation out of this decision process. Here's the professionals. You got the information. We don't need legislators making these rules, because it's not going to work very well, I don't think. This is such a complex problem here. I hate to add to it, but I haven't heard nothing about private land versus public too much. There's a heck of a difference between the two. I don't know how we would implement that in there, but Bill related to it just a little bit. You know, public ground is public ground, and that could be a 50-50 split in all fairness. But that's not going to work with the locals, because I'm a local too, and 50-50 is unreasonable with everything that's going on around us. But I'll tell you, if you get much over 75-25, I think we're going unreasonable, and the non-resident is getting shortchanged. So, and another one for the COA, I think that we've discussed numerous times, predictability is everything for the outfitting career. We need to be able to predict when they're going to draw, because a lot of times, and most of the time, especially with these elderly people that's got all the points, It's a once in a lifetime hunt, their last chance. We need to be able to predict, and outfitters need to give them that quality hunt. So thank you for your time, and if you got any questions or anything, I'd try to help you out a little bit, but.
Okay, any questions from the
All right.
commission? Thank you again, and thank you for making the trip.
Thank you. You guys got a big job ahead of you.
Next up, we'll have Bill Canterbury, followed by our final person, Tyler Emmerich.
Good morning, Wildlife Commissioners and Madam Chair. It's been a couple of years since I've been here. A lot of new faces that I don't know. But with everything I've been listening to here concerning agriculture, I don't see or hear how it might affect agriculture, what you're doing. But we polled several years back, and 50% of our members derive money from whether it's hunters, outfitters that lease the property. So whatever you do is going to affect agriculture some way. And the 65-35, a lot of ranchers, landowners, bring in hunters that have come every year, or the ones that are in dry areas work with outfitters. So if you consider going 80-20, whatever, in some way it's going to affect us. And what might help alleviate some of that problem is an outfitter pool with licensing, so the landowners can continue having clients come in through outfitters. On the one other thing I was trying to think of, I'm a little rusty too here, so bear with me. We had license allocation, and then we had the limited over the counter. When we start talking totally draw, which a few years back at Telluride, the cattlemen were good with going archery limited draw statewide. We're working, trying to figure out how we want to go, and we don't really know where you're going. So we're working on that problem ourselves, how it's going to affect the over the counter. Because if you go totally draw, that allows a landowner to get landowner vouchers. If you withhold, if you'd go totally draw archery and not over the counter or totally draw rifle, we don't qualify for tags. So there's a lot that we're kind of sitting here wondering how it's going to play out, how it's going to affect us. But I hope that you consider ag when you're doing all this in the future. That's about all I got today.
Thank you, Mr. Canterbury. You have some nodding from our agriculture representatives. Any questions? Okay, thank you so much for coming and making the trip.
Last up on this item, we have Tyler Emmerich.
Oh, so sorry, Commissioner Adams, Mr. Canterbury, this might be for you. Come
No,
back up.
actually, it
Oh,
was
okay.
just appreciation for the, and then also going back to the additional focus groups, adding 2 more categories, one for outfitters and one for those in agriculture, as well as specific groups, I think will be really important. And I also, something else that came when you were talking about the private versus public, I was also reminded of the changes to the state wildlife areas, and now non-consumptive users can use that as well. And so again, I'm just kind of thinking about that crowding issue and how it'll be exacerbated or, a continued challenge because of that change in policy. And so perhaps there might be additional groups that are not, interviewing the non-consumptive users of the state wildlife areas as well. So thank you, sir, for the public comments and raising these additional considerations, which I think is why public comment is so valuable. Thank you so much.
Morning. This is my first ever commission meeting. I'm a little nervous too. My name is Tyler Emmerich. I'm a CG Outfitters. I outfit in the northwest corner. The units that take 30 plus points for non-residents to draw. And so when it comes to allocation, I still firmly believe it should be 65-35 across the board. I feel like that's extremely fair for everybody. And as an outfitter, I actually take, in my units, I take 70% in-state residents versus non-residents. So, but I also want to fight for the non-residents too. I believe that, like I said, we are on federal ground and they have just as much right to be there as we do as residents. Another thing about the economic part of it, just Elk alone last year, residents provided 7 million, whereas non-residents provided $49 million in revenue. And so you take that in accountability with also with the money that they spend. A resident hunter spends about an average $104 a day, whereas a non-resident spends $202 a day. So there's a huge economical difference between in-state and residents. And it also takes 13 resident tags to make up one non-resident tag. That's a huge difference. And can it be made up? Maybe, but not without a trickle down effect. It's kind of all I got at this point in time. Thank you.
Okay, I think you have one comment. Hang on, Commissioner Heskett.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Tyler, aren't you in an 80-20 unit already?
Yes, I'm in an 80-20 unit already.
Okay, but you still believe in 65-35?
Yes, and the reason I do is because at this point in time, all these units, like Unit 10, for instance, 4 years ago, it took 4 points less than 2 and 201. Well, ever since the bigger bulls with social media, all these other units where you're going to have these huge point jumps in certain units is social media has provided platforms for the average hunter to post, oh, look what I killed in this unit. Well, okay, well, this is what's going to happen. All these people are going to jump over in this unit. You're just going to see continual spikes and preferred points units that took 5 points last year are taking 11 points now. It's just one of those things where at this point in time, the state people that have those points aren't feeling justified to spend on a lesser unit when they want to go to a unit that they can have a chance at a 350 plus bull, once in a lifetime opportunity. And it's just one of those things. These people have spent 30 some years. I had to tell a guy that was 82 years old a couple of days ago, he has 29 points. And I just flat told him that he's not going to draw. He's just not going to. And that's a hard pill for someone that's 81 years old, that's already put how many hundreds of dollars or even thousands of dollars into CPW. Yeah.
I have one more question on that, actually. So I got to hunt 201 3 or 4 years ago, and I actually waited 25 years to hunt that unit. But I was the young person out there, I felt like. What is the average age of your hunter?
So the average age of my clients is 71 years old, and every year it goes up. I have an 87-year-old this year so far that's booked. I mean, he's got 31 points. The sad part with 31 points, he's still not guaranteed to draw a 201 rifle. He still is sitting at a 40% chance.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Madam
Thank you.
Chair.
Go ahead, Katie.
We, as you know, have public comment coming up after this, but one of the people that's currently on Zoom for public comment also let us know that they're interested in doing public comment on this item. Would you like to hear from them as well?
Sure, thank you.
All right, in that case, let's go ahead and unmute Juan Perez Saez. And if we get Juan unmuted, Juan, do you want your camera on? Looks like we're still working on the unmuting part. Just a second. Juan, you may need to hit accept on your end. Juan, do you see a pop-up on your end to unmute? All right, well, doesn't seem to be coming through, so we'll figure it out.
Yes, hello.
Okay, Juan.
Sorry, I walk away from my computer. Apologies.
It's okay. So as we understand it, you wanted to comment on this license distribution item. Is that right?
No.
Oh, okay. Well, hang on then, please. We got a miscommunication there. We'll be coming back to your overall public comment in a moment then. Sorry, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Juan, for just hanging on for the later public comment. We do have you down for signed up for that. Okay. Commissioner May.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
even though it isn't pertinent to this conversation, Bill brought up the facts, so I think gives me the opportunity to speak about it. Yesterday on our tour, we went past some private land, alfalfa fields that had, as Brett told us, a herd of 250 mule deer. Those 250 mule deer were out a half a mile from a highway. They were lounging, they were relaxed, they weren't being harassed, and that is all due to the fact that private landowners and the stewardship they provide those animals, they provide society a benefit to have a refuge for those animals in this hard time of the year to be able to function. And I just want to use this is the opportunity of one of the benefits that private landowners provide to the society that often isn't realized. That's all right. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that comment. Anything else on this item? Okay, seeing none, I think based on the comments, we've all recognized this is a very big lift. So thank you very much to the staff. Thanks to those who traveled great distances to provide public comment. This is an information item, so it will come back to us. And to Commissioner Phillips's comment, we will arrange a way for us all to do a refresher on this process, because I think that would be helpful. Okay, so we have one quick item before we'll take a quick break, and that's the consent agenda. So I would invite a motion to approve the consent agenda as listed. Commissioner Garcia made a motion, Commissioner Schaefer seconded. And Commissioner Garcia has a comment. Sorry, I forgot about that. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just very quickly, as I was going through the materials for this meeting, there was one item on the consent agenda, which was a license suspension. And I had originally asked that it be pulled off the consent agenda because of my lack of understanding of, after 4 years, I still haven't figured it out. But our hearing examiner, Steve, had made a recommendation that the suspension be modified. And I agreed with that, but I felt that, at least I thought that because there was going to be a modification, we had to pull it and vote on it. I later, after speaking with Jake and with Corey, learned that I didn't need to pull it off, that his recommendation was, in fact, what we were going to consent to. But as I did that, I realized, and I think Steve left, didn't he not? He was here earlier. So I will disclose that I told him I was going to say this yesterday. As I read his recommendation, I thought, maybe he's like me. He's getting old. He's getting soft. Because I don't remember in 4 years having seen Steve modify his own suspension on a recommendation as he did in this particular one. And so I had to talk to him about it. And indeed, he hasn't gotten soft. He's just the same old Steve. But I did not take an opportunity yesterday to thank him because I knew I was going to do this today on the consent calendar. And I was hoping he would be here, but he's not. But I do want to say thank you to him. And for the division, for the commission, you are so lucky to have him as a hearing examiner. He is the optimum example of fairness, of finding accountability for wildlife management, and for compassion, which is not softness. So thank you, Steve, for all the work you do.
Okay, thank you. So we have a motion and a second on the table. All in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign? Okay, so we are scheduled at a break. We're just a few minutes behind. I think we'll have some, sorry, Katie, go ahead.
Madam Chair, when did you want to do public comment at item 20? We do have
Sorry.
one virtual and one in person.
Sorry. Yes, let's go ahead and do that. Yeah, because
Okay.
they're with us. Sorry.
All right,
I
and-
skipped over that.
Wonders of hybrid meetings. There's a little confusion on our end still, I think. Juan, are you doing the public comment for the Next 100 Coalition, or we also have your colleague Hector in our waiting room? We get Juan unmuted again. Juan dropped, so let's let Hector. And while we're doing that, Jarek Bynum, if you're here for your public comment, maybe you can go ahead and come up.
Thank you. My goodness. Thank Thank you to Acting Director Heather Dugan, Chair Carrie Hauser, and to the full commission and staff for the hard work you all do to maintain and protect access to Colorado's beautiful landscapes and abundant natural resources. My name is Jared Bynum, and I'm the Communities and Justice Policy Advocate with Conservation Colorado. Conservation Colorado is one of Colorado's largest grassroots environmental advocacy organizations, and we have a stated commitment to racial equity, inclusion, and justice. Conservation Colorado has long valued our partnership with CPW, and through this work, we believe we have made strong progress in better protecting and making accessible Colorado's lands and outdoor amenities. Some recent and notable joint victories include the passage of the Keep Colorado Wild Annual Pass, slated to add tens of millions of additional revenue to CPW's coffers, and helping to ensure the longevity of the division's assets, as well as the passage of the Outdoor Equity Grant Program, a combined effort between traditional environmental organizations like ours and BIPOC-led, BIPOC community serving organizations that will expand access for thousands of Colorado's youth and their families to more equitably engage in outdoor activity. Policies like these were designed to not only meet the rising demand for Colorado state parks and wildlife areas, but to also expand access to these sites for more Coloradans, especially those with limited resources or experiences in the outdoors. As we know, the history of the environmental movement in lands and wildlife conservation has not always prioritized or included the voices and interests of excluded and BIPOC communities, and has even at times actively harmed us. But thanks to efforts like these, we have begun to right these wrongs. Even as we are collectively working to make progress, there's tremendous harm that members of BIPOC communities like me are experiencing as we engage with CPW and DNR. Most recently, myself and hundreds of others were witness to racially charged and insensitive remarks made by Director Dan Prenslow. While we understand there's an investigation underway surrounding this incident, we believe that the agency must dig deeper than this singular incident in order to build a culture where members of BIPOC communities feel truly welcome. We believe that CPW and DNR must not only complete their investigation into the conference quickly and accurately, but further than solely investigating this as an isolated personnel issue, both the division and the department should reckon, just as Conservation Colorado must, with the fact that there's transformational work that must be undertaken if the agency hopes to meet their stated diversity, equity, and inclusion goals. We also believe that a strong first step of many needed in the near term is for CPW to put forth their plans for not only just addressing this incident, but bringing about the necessary cultural and systems level change needed for the division to best meet the demands of a 21st century populace, one that is racially diverse, socioeconomically diverse, culturally diverse, and most of all, excited and
15
impassioned
seconds.
about the outdoors and the limitless opportunities they provide. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you so much for being here today and for your comments. Okay, do we have?
And next up, we do have Hector Salas in place of Juan Perez Saez. So we'll get Hector unmuted. And Hector, if you want to, do you want your camera on?
No, it's okay.
Okay, go ahead, Hector.
So hello, my name is Hector Salas, and I am a member of Next 100 Colorado, speaking here on behalf of the coalition. Next 100 Colorado is the state's premier coalition of diverse leaders of color in the outdoors. And we're committed to establishing an inclusive system of parks, trails, waters, forests, and natural places. An inclusive approach to public lands over the next 100 years must be driven by three guiding principles: reflect the faces of our country, respect all cultures, and actively engage all people. Since it first began meeting informally in 2017, Next 100 Colorado has worked to build relationships with CPW and DNR staff to advance shared goals related to diversity, equity, and inclusion in our state's outdoor spaces. We have shared recommendations, met with staff several times, participated in and helped plan the DNR DEI roundtables, took part in other state outreach events like the Fisher's Peak planning process, and spearheaded the development and advocacy for the creation of the state's Outdoor Equity Grant Program, now in its first year of grant making. We were thrilled to participate in the April 2022 Partners in the Outdoors Conference, and due in part to our efforts, it was one of the most racially and ethnically diverse conferences hosted in CPW history. Unfortunately, as expressed by several officials in last month's commission meeting, our communities are troubled by the incidents of overt and covert racism that took place at the conference. We stand in solidarity with ALA's desire for meaningful redress, and further with all those calling for CPW leadership to examine and address the policies and practices that foster a culture in which discrimination like this persists, and to hold those involved accountable. Equity is central to CPW strategic goals and will enhance the agency's brand and build a better future for CPW and the people it serves. Next 100 Colorado, our coalition members, and our partner organizations have policy recommendations related to workforce diversity, stakeholder access, and engagement storytelling, board and commission representation, alongside many others that we hope to share with the commission. We strongly encourage CPW leadership to dedicate time at an upcoming commission meeting to consider our recommendations, as well as those of other racial and environmental justice leaders. CPW has the chance to use this moment to address past harms, begin taking action to change its culture, and build a foundation for a future where all people feel a sense of belonging, not only in the organization, but also in the outdoors. We hope to be a partner with you in that work. On behalf of Next 100 Colorado, thank you for the time to provide our comments.
Okay, thanks to everyone who joined us today, either virtually or in person, for public comment. We're grateful for your input and ideas. And we are now, I'm sorry, I apologize for fusing 19 and 20 together. That's my fault. We're at 10:24. If we can take a, oh, sorry, I'm going to come back to you. You're going to get me off track again. Commissioner Garcia.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I know we're running late, but I did a thank you to Steve, and he snuck out on us. And so the chair has allowed me at least 30 seconds to renew my thank you while you're here in person. I want to thank you as a commissioner, as a lawyer, and as a hunter angler for all the great work you do for this division and for this commission, and to recognize and thank you for your fairness, your commitment to our mission and accountability for wildlife management, and for the compassion you show in your decisions and the work you do. Thank you, Steve.
Thanks, Steve. You got two of those. So just, you know, in absentia, you got one as well. Okay, 10:40. Can we come back at 10:40? That's 15 minutes. We'll be stand in recess, and please give your ballots to Jake Matter. Thank you.
We're going to go live here in a few seconds.
Okay, welcome back. Thank you very much. We are on item number 22. We're running a little behind, so we'll do our best. But this is obviously an important item for us, and this is an action item. So I'll turn it over to Fletcher for the 2023 OHV Trails Grant recommendations. And as we all know, our site visit today is highlighting the work of this. Essentially, it's connected to this. So, thanks, Fletcher. I'll turn it to you.
Thank you, Jeff. Madam Chair, directors, members of the Commission Council, my name is Fletcher Jacobs, State Trails Program Manager. And as Madam Chair mentioned, I'm here to present on an action item, the 2023 OHV Trail Grant Funding Recommendations with a request for your approval. Colorado's off-highway vehicle program has been in existence since 1991, and it's administered by the Colorado Parks and Wildlife State Trails Program. This program exists to improve and enhance motorized recreation opportunities in Colorado while promoting safe, responsible use of OHVs in protection of our state's natural resources. The program sells registration and use permits for use on all motorized trails in the state. The price of this permit is $25.25, whether it's a use permit or for registration. These funds, 25 cents, is put to the Search and Rescue Fund. Some of the funds come to the OHV program to help fund staff as well as registration, IPAWS cost, some of the administrative duties, and then the rest of the funding, the vast majority goes directly back onto the ground, back out into the ground via the OHV grant program, which we're here talking about today. The program was started in 1991, and as you can see on the slide, since the start, it's provided over $73 million of those fees back out onto the ground for improvements in motorized recreational opportunities. The grant program is open to local, county, and state governments, as well as federal agencies, special recreation districts, and nonprofit organizations with management responsibilities over public lands. They all may apply and receive these motorized trail grants. Every year, these grants go live in the first business day of October and then are due the beginning of December. Last year, so the OHV registration and use permits, very similar to fishing license, they go on sale April 1st and then run through the subsequent March 31st. Last year, we registered or sold permits for over 226,000 OHVs, which is a 10% increase from the previous year. As you can see there at the bottom, the big benefit for the program is the OHV users, who obviously are able to enjoy these on-the-ground trail improvements. Communities get the economic benefit from the recreational use. General public, as this program helps these OHV users understand the impact they have and helps them pay into the system. And then, of course, to the public land managers who have the responsibilities to manage these resources. This slide probably looks somewhat familiar, as this is the same four-tiered system that we go through with the OHV Trail Grant program that we do for our non-motorized and land motor conservation fund applications. So all of our applications, when we receive them, first go to our wildlife field staff, so our district wildlife managers, area wildlife managers, so they can review the projects. Then they go up through the regions to work with our regional trails coordinators, our deputy regional managers, and then to our regional managers. As they work through any potential wildlife issues that get flagged, they will create a wildlife impact letter that is shared as part of Appendix B of your commission mailing item. We also, of course, share those with the applicant so they can address those to the subcommittee. The subcommittee, of course, receives a copy of those as well. And any potential concerns we ask them to address. And we do have one project that in the commission mailing item I mentioned, I'll refer to that when we get to it, that we did have some adjustments. After we do the wildlife review, the State Trails Program shares it with the OHV subcommittee. We evaluate these and rank them in priority order. The grant review and ranking subcommittee is 16 scoring members. You can see them in Appendix A, list list those members' names and their affiliation, as well as the State Trails Committee, who's listed there as well, who takes the ranking recommendations and make these funding allocations that we present to you here today. At each step in the process, we do invite public comment, so that is also taken into consideration. I did want to highlight one piece that I think is kind of important and sometimes a little bit hard to wrap your head around when you only hear about this once a year with the OHV program. So we are talking about funds that will go out on the ground last year. So today, for folks who are able to join the regional staff who put together the field trip, you're going to have a chance to meet some applicants who the commission funded last year. So it'll be a member of the Forest Service crew here out of the Salina Ranger District, as well as Stay the Trail, one of the nonprofits who really focus on the education and ethics that they share with the OHV community. But those were grants that were funded last year that are just now hitting the ground. So these are grants that go into 2023. One of the outcomes of the last couple of years, as we've all seen the huge increase in outdoor recreation use, we've also unfortunately had some hiring difficulties with our partners. And so we've actually seen a return in some of the funding that was not able to go out in the ground. And so I know Acting Director Dugan highlighted this yesterday, but I also want to make sure we're thanking our partners with the Colorado Youth Corps Association, who we've been able to partner with now 2 years in a row to put out an RFP, request for projects directly, that those projects that we put out the call this fall, they're hitting the ground right now. Over 2 years, we now will have funded 70 weeks of Youth Corps, primarily focused on trail maintenance from the increase in COVID recreation, but also in wildfire mitigation. And so 35 of those weeks are actually going to take place at the Sulphur Ranger District as part of response to the East Troublesome Fire that in 2020 to help with runoff, erosion control, and kind of getting that area back open. So we're really excited for that partnership with the Youth Corps Association. So getting back to this year's grants, we've got a couple slides here just kind of showing a summary. So this first slide there on the left, the graph there kind of does a breakdown. At the bottom there, you see we had 63 total applications this year for just over $7.43 million. You can see it's broken down by agencies, the amount requested, and the number of applications. We do have one combined agency project, and you also notice CPWs on there. We do have a combined project here actually with AHRA in the Salina Ranger District. And then we have a state forest trail crew as well that works on the OHV project. So we just always like to highlight that. It's a little confusing. We're kind of granting ourselves some of this money. They're on the right, you can see their grant request by activity. The numbers for some reason didn't show up on this slide, but 57% of this year's request were for trail maintenance. 12% were for enforcement visitor contacts, 12% were for travel plan implementation and planning, which is essentially maps, inventory, decommissioning, rehabilitating non-system routes, monitoring, et cetera. And then kind of the big yellow slice, there's 19% is kind of our miscellaneous category, equipment, signs, and then also our Youth Corps requests. So outside of CYCA, that I just mentioned, we also do get requests directly through the program. And so this year we had requests for 19 weeks of additional Youth Corps. The next slide here shows a little bit kind of more 30,000 foot view. So again, you can see 63 total applications there, the graph on the left side of the screen. So 7.43 million in total. And so we have two different grant applications that we accept. So the Good Management Crew, you can see we had 25 requests for 2.43 million, and then our competitive program. The Good Management Crew is something we always like to highlight. It's kind of become I think really a shining example of collaboration here in the state when it comes to managing outdoor recreation. So this program was started in 2001 and essentially allows our federal agencies to be able to proactively manage their highest use areas for OHV and actually, as the name implies, implement their travel management plan. So if Forest Service crews can show a track record of, making sure they're spending the money, getting excellent results on the ground of implementing those plans, we actually will put them in this good management status where they're guaranteed funding every year. So that funding traditionally had been about $85,000 the last few years. We actually upped it to $115,000 this year, just as we saw rising costs. And what this allows our Forest Service crew to do is recruit and plan and actually retain folks longer, because it's a pretty special skill set to, of course, ride these machines, have the trail crew background. So we're pretty excited about that. So we have 25 current Good Management crews, and I'll talk about, we actually had 3 more who requested joining that program this year. And then our competitive side, that's open to just more project specific crews who aren't good management, counties, trailheads, signs, maintenance requests, those types of things. So you can see we had 38 applications this year for just over 5 million in request. The graph that are on the right just kind of shows the increase that I know you hear about every meeting. As we see increase in recreation, we've seen an increase in requests through this program. So you can see it's grown from just over 5, 6.2 last year, and then again this year, the 7.43. Then finally, the last overview slide, that this map just kind of giving you a rough overview of where these requests come from. For some reason, our map didn't show the regional breakdown, but very roughly, of course, we have a couple of these that don't quite follow our regional boundaries, but it's roughly 25 requests from the Northwest region, 16 in the Southwest, 9 in the Southeast, 9 in the Northeast, and then we have 5 sort of statewide projects. So moving in, this is always, I struggle every year to figure out the best way to show this. So obviously you have a lot of this information in your mailing materials already. But after our subcommittee scores these grants, we take that together, and you can see it's Appendix B shows the direct breakdown of the scores. And this slide here shows the good management breakdowns. Again, we had 25 crews from last year who requested to continue to remain in the program. We actually had 3 additional crews, 2 BLM, Trace Rios and Royal Gorge Trail crews, and then 1 Forest Service, the Clear Creek Ranger District, which the subcommittee is all recommending joining the crew. However, during our annual review of these, we actually are recommending one of the crews, the Pikes Peak crew, be removed from good management status and instead be scored competitively. So again, there'll be good management this year, but next year, you'll see here in a second, we did score them competitively, still recommending them for funding, but just due to some of their work on the ground and communication, the subcommittee felt that they should be scored competitively for the next few years. Now we're moving into competitive projects. Again, this is a little bit difficult to see on the slides, but the far left there shows the scores as you can kind of go down, and just as a little bit of a, you could see starts in 88 as the high, and then the far is showing what the recommended funding level is. The one project I did want to highlight, hopefully my mouse is showing up here, the grant app number 1, which is roughly in the middle of the screen, the white, has the white background. This was a project we did have some wildlife concerns on the Southwest region. I'd like to thank their staff who worked very hard directly with the Dolores Ranger District. We did have a lot of concerns around some new trail construction that was part of this request. And so as you know, the commission had requested this previously, tried to put that in the mailing item, a little more of an explanation. There was some disagreement on the proper seasonal closure due to some concerns around when that would be open. So when we couldn't come to a consensus on an agreed upon date, we did decide to just ask the Ranger District to remove that construction piece. So that's not part of this grant. Instead, in the Southwest region supported this. There's plenty of maintenance work that needed to be done still in that area. In the Southwest actually had some suggestions on where to go that was very agreeable to the Forest Service. So we were able to work through that concern and still have this project be funded. Sorry, I lost my mouse. There we go. And then the second page of the competitive, as you can see there, we are recommending all projects above a 70 get scored is typically kind of our number that we do recommend for funding. We do run out of money before that. So you could see there the bottom projects. We did actually have 2 projects who withdrew just to some financial concerns as they went through the process right at the presentation level did withdraw. So did not end up scoring those projects. So finally, kind of summing it all up, you can see here, the good management crew, we're recommending 27 grants for 2.46 million be funded this year, and then competitively 33 grants for 3.77 million, which is a total of 60 grants for the 6.23 million. And really where this number comes from, I do think, again, it's important to point this out, 6 million comes directly from that registration use permit fee. So, you know, that's the user dollars going back out in the ground. And then the 2.3 $1 million is actually recreational trails program money, which is a fuel excise tax on OHV fuel use administered by Federal Highway. So it's again sort of OHV funds coming back into that. So that's kind of the overview of what it would look like. And with that, be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, I'm sure you have some, Commissioner Garcia.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Fletcher, thank you for all the work you do in your subcommittee. Great work. And Grand Trails, once again, wants to thank you. And of particular importance, I also want to thank the regional managers. While we trust all the great work you do, Fletcher, we trust your subcommittee. For me, at least, it's always an additional comfort level when our regional managers take the time to give us their input on these as well. So thank you.
I think that's Commissioner Blecka.
I was just going to see if you had the time, could you go over a little bit more in depth about the good management versus competitive breakdown and just the kind of like where that, how you came to that?
For sure. So with the good management, we basically put it on it, and I should have pointed this out. I appreciate the question, Commissioner. It is only open to our federal partners, so it can only be Forest Service, BLM, and essentially this is a program that allows them again to plan out years in advance, knowing that this money is always going to be there. They can basically hire full-time seasonals that they know the money's always going to be there. They don't have to count on this grant funding, chasing it every year. As long as they're performing, they're going to receive this money. So it's a pretty important status to get that money. I know some of our nonprofit clubs would love if we were able to expand that to them, but we've kind of made the decision. It's really in keeping with the point of the program to implement travel management. We need to stick to that just being a federal breakdown for now. So then competitive would be any of those federal crews who have not yet met that status, and then the nonprofit and county, city entities who do allow OHV recreation.
Thank you.
Commissioner Schaefer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So just quick clarification. So Spring Creek Trail is pulled from that proposal?
Yes.
Okay. So I just want to say, gratitude to the Southwest region for the amount of work that they did, trying to work through that process with the Forest Service. I also encourage everyone to just read through the notes on that aspect to get a small glimpse into the amount of work necessary for, this is just a Trails EA that one of the region offices is engaging with the Forest Service on at least a half dozen times on one single aspect of a project. This is where a lot of the work that is occurring at the regional level that we don't see at the commission oftentimes, and the public never sees, but takes up a great deal of time and resources and capacity. But it's invaluable work. And I just want to be sure that everyone understands, like, it is so valuable and so appreciated, despite the fact that it is largely behind the scenes. My other comment, I brought it up briefly, I think in the last grant portion. It'd be great. I understand a lot of moving pieces right now, and we're always trying to build airplanes while we're flying them. But the integration with the regional roundtables, the partnerships in this State Trails grant process, I think leads to better outcomes over time. There is no ideal scenario, at least that I've thought of, that of an integration approach when it comes to these individual trail proposal and grant processes, but it's one where we, as a commission, and I think also as an agency, there's a greater level of certainty provided by having more eyes from a local community that is ostensibly made up of a diverse array of interests, saying like, yeah, we really support this project because it's going to be part of our longer term vision locally. Being able to integrate those approaches, I think, leads to the best possible outcomes. That said, it's a lot easier said than done, but that's something I think that we need to continue to endeavor to do, both whether that's through a venue like the co-op, of helping to provide a framework for how that integration might occur, or if it's at the commission level, staff level, whatever it may be. But the ideal scenario is that more hands make the lifting a little easier, but we end up with better outcomes. And so I continue to think like that is the ideal approach. And if we can somehow get there, that would be great. So thank you again.
Thank you for the comments, Commissioner. And yeah, I certainly want to just briefly also make sure to publicly thank the Southwest region, obviously Corey Chick, Matt Thorpe, Adrian Archuleta, Josh Stout, Brian McGee. We're all very involved with that project, to Commissioner Schaefer's point, and worked very hard with the Dolores Ranger District to, Well, frustrating these conversations sometimes are, and I appreciate actually the Dolores Ranger District for agreeing to hear our concerns and make those modifications. So I definitely appreciate you mentioning that and giving us an opportunity to thank them. And for the regional partnership conversation, that's definitely also our stated goal. Met multiple times with staff working on that to figure out how we can better, as those become more online, continue to integrate our grant process through that.
Thank you, Commissioner Touchton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Fletcher, let me just echo what Luke said. I appreciate that your team worked hard to remove that one trail from that dozer project. And you go down to the appendix that had all the wildlife concerns. That was a big one. It got flagged, but there were a bunch of others. And then in the memo, sort of the summary that was at the beginning of the document, it just says all the others were addressed. And, I'm happy to accept that, but I would like to, in the future, because that's, to be honest, that's what I read these things for, is to see if the wildlife concerns were addressed. I go straight to that section. And I'd like to know addressed. To me, that's really important to see that, if staff was concerned about something, that their concerns were legitimately removed. And I really like the dozer example because they just cut that trail right out of there and did some other work instead. So anyway, just for the future, rather than a summary that says we took care of all of it, I'd like to go through and see, okay, this one had this concern and this is what they did to remove that concern. But thank you.
No, I appreciate the suggestion, Commissioner. Yeah, we were struggling with the sheer amount of the best way to do that without overwhelming. And I think for the most part with, the comments this round, a lot were, we'd like a little more information or some requesting around moving some of the budget items. And so during the meeting, we literally just sat there and said, okay, can you move this budget item, or is that not possible? How could you still address some of the, I think there was one, the motocross track that had concerns around additional funding going to weed mitigation. And so while they didn't have the responsibility, they agreed to speak to the county. The regional staff said that was a very acceptable solution. So I think we can, if it makes sense to you, try to capture a little bit of that conversation and then share that directly in this document moving forward.
That would be helpful.
Your mic is not hot, Commissioner Touchton.
Thank you for the clarification. No, I think that would be helpful, Fletcher, because, when you read through the concerns, at least to me, they sometimes raise alarm. And I want to see that we're not funding things that are bad for wildlife. So I would like to see those things, how it was addressed at the end.
Okay, anything else before we invite a motion on this item? Seeing none. Is there a motion to approve the 2023 OHV grant funding recommendations as presented by staff? Commissioner Bleka, Commissioner Phillips. We have a first and a second. I think we can do voice vote on this one. All in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Sign. Okay, congratulations. Thank you for the great work. Okay. Okay, we'll move immediately to item number 23 for members of the public. This is the Colorado Wildlife Habitat Program 2022 RFP. So we'll welcome back Kim and Amanda. Thank you very much.
Good morning, Madam Chair, Assistant Director, Acting Director, Commissioners. Thank you for this opportunity today to talk about the Colorado Wildlife Habitat Program's 2022 RFP. I'm Amanda Nims, Land Protection Specialist. I manage the program. This is Kim Rogers, our Real Estate Section Manager. As you know, this program is a voluntary program for landowners to protect their wildlife habitat and provide opportunities for public access on their private land. We do this through funding conservation easements, public access easements, and in special circumstances, fee title acquisition, which means when CPW buys the property outright for wildlife habitat and public access. This year, the recommendations for funding priorities and preferences looks just like last year's 2021 RFP. Our priorities come from statute, the habitat stamp legislation for public access, big game winter range and migration corridors, species of concern, riparian areas, landscape scale parcels, so those that are large, and those that provide connectivity to other conserved lands so we can get real landscape scale conservation. And the funding preferences with this year will include working farms and ranches and those conservation easements that support wildlife crossings. Funding for this program comes from the habitat stamp, from revenue generated by hunting and fishing licenses, and from our partnership with Great Outdoors Colorado. This year for 2022, we're looking at an $11 million budget. And this year, we are starting the program a little earlier, responding to our stakeholders, hoping to increase the number of applications we receive this year. Instead of having an application period of 4 to 6 weeks, we're looking at 4 months. So opening up the RFP on June 13th in just a couple weeks with a mid-October deadline. And then the process will be very similar to this last year, just a couple months ago. We'll come back to you in January with an update on the applications and the process, with first approvals in March and then final decisions in May. Any questions?
Okay, thank you so much. We've heard this topic twice, so thank you for the review. Commissioner Haskett?
Let Commissioner Schaefer go first.
Okay, Commissioner Schaefer and then Commissioner Haskett.
I just wanted to say I appreciate you listening to the feedback from stakeholders and altering the RFP process to provide more adequate time so that we can hopefully get more proposals in, better proposals, but also just understanding it's a complex process for some folks. This allows greater interface with our DWMs and other regional staff. So commend you for altering the approach and listening to folks.
Thank you. Commissioner Haskett.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would also like to say thank you for listening and adding time. That's really important, I think. And I also hope that you will let people know that there is help out there to fill out the applications, because it is a complex process. And the other part of that, and Commissioner Schaefer may be able to answer that too. On our priorities, I'm wondering if we're ever looking at properties that also have housing, with the current situation of housing in Colorado and wages and all of that stuff. The I-25 corridor, the I-70 corridor are really tough places for us to provide housing for our staff, or them to find housing is probably more like it. Is that part of the scoring matrix at all?
Good morning, Chair Hauser, Assistant Director Dugan, and Commissioners. I'm Kim Rogers, the Real Estate Section Manager. It isn't something that we score for. There have been projects in the past that have had the opportunity to acquire some housing, but to my knowledge, those had not been selected.
Okay. I think I'd like us to look at that. I don't know how everybody else feels about that, but we do have a problem. I know that. So, and I see.
Mr. Ackerman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just as a reminder, Southeast Region Manager Brett Ackerman. I also sit on the Habitat Stamp Committee on behalf of the agency. And these priorities are generally set forth statutorily. And we follow those pretty closely. There's nothing that precludes us from adding a separate priority that we would also consider as part of the program. We haven't, as of yet, considered housing as part of the program, but something that, as Ms. Rogers pointed out, we do acquire from time to time. And so if that's a desire of the commission, we certainly can talk about what adding that as some type of prioritization might look like.
Thank you. And I guess I'd like others to chime in what they think. Thank you.
Commissioner Brady.
Thank you, Commissioner Chair. I would agree with Commissioner Haskett on housing. I think that if there is an opportunity to get more access to housing our team, I think this is absolutely a good way to do that. Separately, I just wanted to comment on, and maybe this might be a question for Jake. Is there anything that prohibits us from proactively going after parcels rather than just responding to applicants coming to us? In other words, going out and strongly suggesting that somebody apply?
There is no such prohibition, and you're welcome to do so. May I revisit the prior question that the priorities are spelled out in statute. I don't think if there's a housing benefit to CPW personnel, that's kind of an added bonus for some of these properties, but I wouldn't characterize it as a priority, or it's a legitimate consideration. You can certainly consider that in your application process and then review, but the priorities are really explicitly laid out in statute, which is reflected on Ms. Nim's presentation.
And so just as a follow-up to that, COMAP and RCN have a really kind of robust mapping system that's a foundation for climate resilient conservation. And this presentation that I was a part of recognized that there's 14 million acres of RCN that lack any form of protection, a lot of it in the Southeast region. And so I think what would be really interesting to do is to maybe through the regional managers and some of our other staff to identify parcels that would really benefit from having some level of conservation on them, and using some of this mapping data that already exists that goes down to a parcel level, and maybe being proactive, especially in partnership with our agricultural partners and the different unions that we could work with. And I would personally really like to see us be more proactive instead of just respond to applicants coming in, and take a proactive approach to getting the parcels that we think could really benefit from it. Thank you.
Thank you for those comments.
Thank you, Commissioner Phillips. And then Commissioner Touchton.
I just want to say thank you for the preference for working farms and ranches. I think speaking from experience, we're facing some tough waters ahead with climate, market, all kinds of things. So I think adding the preference to make more tools available for farmers and ranchers, I think is a really positive thing. And also big thanks for going from a couple weeks to a few months, because besides treading water, we're busy trying to do everything else too. So that's going to make a huge difference and hopefully open up the program to a lot more people. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep.
May I add, we can't take all the thanks for extending the application period. We had the full support of CPW leadership team in that regard, and they recognized that as well. So I just wanted to give a shout out to them, to thank them for doing that.
Commissioner Touchton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, first to respond to Commissioner Haskett, sorry. My H's got mixed up. Question about housing. I think and Jake might have said something similar. I think if the housing is there on something that we are acquiring, great, keep it and use it for staff. I don't know that we should be building houses so in areas we want as habitat. And then the other comment I had, and I don't mean any disrespect to working farms and ranches because Duke's bigger than me. And I think that is very important. And Dallas has given some examples of how important working farms and ranches are to conservation. There was just a caveat that I wanted to put in there because that's one of our self-established preferences that doesn't come from the legislation, which is that we remember sometimes it might be appropriate to retire a working farm or ranch to benefit wildlife. And the examples that leap to mind are in some of the lesser prairie chicken conservation areas. I think that there's some acquisitions where one of the reasons the species, the potential acquisitions that we could make where the best thing we could do for the species is remove the grazing pressure. And that would similarly in bighorn sheep, some, if they're, I know third parties might be interested in doing an acquisition, and the very best thing they could do for the bighorn sheep is to remove the domestic sheep. So again, I'm all down with preferring working farms and ranches, but just that we remember that in some situations, what's right for wildlife might be to basically give this land back to the wildlife and not insist that it remain in production if that's the problem for the wildlife there. So that was just my caveat on that preference.
Thank you.
Commissioner Schaefer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a couple points here. As Mr. Matter said, the priorities are largely set in the habitat statute. The preferences are what the commission can sort of inform that we would like this to be a preference for this cycle. So I just want to make, there's a distinction there though. The other thing I wanted to mention related to Commissioner Vardy's points is that there's a number of different planning processes that are currently underway, both within the non-government and government sort of roles. So we have a state conservation plan that is going to be being initiated fairly soon here. Did some of your points that's a place that perhaps there's a vision for private land conservation that's as part of that, as well as I know Keep It Colorado has been working on private land conservation strategy and a very large holistic strategy on a statewide basis. I think that these venues are places to be able to be promulgating the vision for conservation in private lands. I would say while it's while it may be legal, going out and seeking properties, as well as the potential of buying properties for housing. Though I will go and carry some water for Assistant Director Vilsack here. There's also the Capital Development Committee, and so there's other implications that go into doing things outside the norm. And I think that we have to be cognizant of the fact that we have a really successful program that we don't want to necessarily tinker too much with.
Comment, just.
Thank you.
Okay, great. Chair, Commissioner May.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Some of the examples Commissioner Touchin gave notwithstanding, one of the examples I've used, and I've used it for quite a while, but CRP lands in eastern Colorado, many of them are phasing out of production. Their contracts are expiring. And I've used the example that CPW staff has identified some new lesser prairie chicken leks on CPW grasslands. And I've made the recommendation on the American Beautiful Initiative that maybe some of those lands are considered as important conservation areas because the chickens have found their way back in after generations of their absence. The lesser prairie chickens have found their way back in. Now that they're there, I think it's critically important that the wildlife has identified to us what's important. This isn't us identifying it, they've identified it. And I think there's a way, and I've spoken with some of the staff, CPW staff, that there is a way to identify those properties and maybe make a proactive reach out to those landowners, but not under the guise of taking it out of production, not preventing it from being a working farm or ranch. But as I said, notwithstanding the examples that Commissioner Touchin gave, responsible grazing is a huge benefit to wildlife. Grass needs disturbance, and the younglets on the land provide that needed disturbance for multiple species of grass to thrive. So I would like us to be able to reach out to some landowners in those situations. Granted, when we get presentations like this, what we usually see are mountain streams, rocks, mountains, trees. But I would like us to shift that focus somewhat to some of the areas that are maybe not as scenic, but in my opinion, more important to the biodiversity that all of us need. And that would be some of the CRP grasslands, returning native grasslands to our landscape and making that habitat for birds, And it has to be done with the idea that it remains a working land, a working ranch, and responsible grazing, not irresponsible grazing, is a benefit to that. So I would hope that we can do some reach out to that, and maybe in our next presentations that we begin to see some of those properties on the Eastern Plains that aren't mountain streams and aren't scenic mountain areas, but are more important to the wildlife as has been identified to us. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you.
Doug Vilsack.
Just got a quick comment related to what Commissioner Touchton and Commissioner May were saying. And I stepped out for a second, so this may have been covered, but I think the uniqueness of the Habitat Stamp program and the kind of requirements and statute for what the money is spent on is kind of one of the reasons why we end up getting a lot of mountain streams and frankly, places, that focus on big game habitat or hunting opportunities and things like that. And I think that's one of the great benefits of the RFP program, because we have hunters and anglers paying into that program for that type of opportunity and for those species. But it does kind of bring up the fact that we do have a gap when it comes to, for example, land protections or acquisitions related to species that aren't big game animals. And the RFP process is really focused in on habitat and stamp dollars and doesn't do a great job of addressing that, frankly. And so I guess just to put that out there, perhaps as we work on Keep Colorado Wild, one of the intents of that funding, hopefully if it materializes and spills over into some of those other categories for wildlife and for recreation and state parks and things like that, is to come up with a similar or a parallel process. Now that for the first time, perhaps in the agency's history, we have funding for those types of projects, to have a similar process to kind of consider those types of lands. Because really, the RFP has some pretty significant limitations on, what we're focused in on because of the funding source, because it's paid for by hunters and anglers. So just as something to think about as we think about Keep Colorado Wild.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Adams.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I just wanted to lift up the incredible work of the Colorado Natural Areas Council as hopefully an area that can benefit from this specific topic. And, when I look at the portfolio of those areas, they actually are primarily not the traditionally more scenic ones, but certainly I agree with Commissioner May. Equally, if not more important, as it relates to biodiversity and ecological health. Thank you.
Okay, in the interest of time, if there are no other comments, is there a motion to approve the director's recommendations for the 2022 Colorado Wildlife Habitat Program's priorities and preferences?
So moved.
Commissioner Phillips and Commissioner Schaefer. I think we can do a voice vote. All in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. Okay, thank you so much for all the great work and certainly to the volunteer committee. This is another one that is a heavy lift. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to do a quick transition. Just a little housekeeping. We do have a noon checkout a little later. So if you're worried about that, we will probably run a little bit over. So hope that works for everyone. Brett is and his team is on hand for whenever we finish for the site visit this afternoon. So we'll adjust accordingly. So this is for the benefit of the public. Item number 24. We're on the update on Colorado River Connectivity Channel. So Carlin and Jeremy are with us. Thank you for being here. We'll switch over the deck.
Good afternoon, almost afternoon, Madam Chair, Commission, Acting Director Dugan. Thanks for having us. My name is Carlin Armstrong. I am in the ATNR branch, a Senior Water Resource Engineer and Water Project Mitigation Coordinator. And I'm here today with Jeremy Huntington, Area 9 Area Wildlife Manager, to provide the Commission an update on the Colorado River Connectivity Channel project, otherwise known as the CRCC. I'm going to start with some quick background on the project to refresh the commission on what's going on here. And then we'll get into some more details on our contributions to the project costs, and a project update. So Windy Gap Reservoir is an on-channel reservoir located at the confluence, I'm moving this over here, of the Colorado River and Fraser Rivers in Grand County, just downstream of Granby. The reservoir was constructed in the 1980s by Northern Colorado Water Conservancy District's sub-district on behalf of the Windy Gap participants. Water from the reservoir is pumped up to Lake Granby, where it is routed to customers on Colorado's Northern Front Range. And as you can see here, the Windy Gap Dam crosses the entire floodplain, disconnecting the Fraser and Upper Colorado Rivers from the Colorado River downstream. Oh, this is, yep. So the disconnection of the river at Windy Gap has prevented fish passage upstream to the Colorado and Fraser Rivers. It's prevented sediment movement downstream, which is critical to the maintenance of aquatic habitat. And it has negative impacts to the hydrologic cycle in the river. The river downstream has also experienced increased temperatures from the reservoir. The health of aquatic life downstream of the reservoir has also been in decline since the reservoir was built. There has been documented losses of 38% of macroinvertebrate diversity, including the complete loss of giant stoneflies, also the loss of native sculpin populations and changes in fish population dynamics over time. It's worth noting here that the rainbow trout decline is in part due to the loss of habitat, but is also due to the presence of whirling disease and the abundance of tubifex worms, which host whirling disease. And those tubifex worms are living in Windy Gap Reservoir. In the early 2000s, Northern Water came back with a proposal to do the Windy Gap Firming Project, which involves the construction of a new reservoir over on the east slope called Chimney Hollow. And that new reservoir on the east slope will allow them to pump more water out of Windy Gap Reservoir to bring over to their Front Range customers. And it's through this new permitting process for the Windy Gap Firming Project that the concept of the Colorado River Connectivity Channel was really able to take flight. So I do want to turn for a little bit here to talk about CPW contributions. There's been a lot of, oh, excuse me, I keep getting messed up by these slides. So the Colorado River Connectivity Channel project was developed as a collaborative keystone project to restore physical and biological connectivity of the Colorado River around Windy Gap Reservoir. The CRCC involves realigning Windy Gap Dam. And so you'll see on the bottom of the picture is the existing Windy Gap Dam along the bottom, and the new black line is going to be the new location of the dam. And then they're going to develop a channel around the reshaped reservoir so the river can bypass Windy Gap Reservoir, fully connecting the river upstream and downstream. This will allow for increased sediment movement, aquatic species movement, create new aquatic habitat, and provide significant economic benefits to local communities from new recreation opportunities. A dam realignment and river bypass of the scale has never been completed in Colorado, and to staff's knowledge, may be the first of its kind in the country. So the design for this project was completed by Northern Water and their consultants, and they've been working on this design for almost 2 years. Through this entire process, CPW has been engaged in design review at critical intervals, has provided comments and recommendations, and has engaged in meetings with other subject matter experts to ensure the best possible outcome for the project. At this point, we think the design is looking pretty good. It's about at 100%. We're still working out some minor details with Northern Water and their team, but everything's coming together to support construction here shortly. However, the system is dynamic and it has a lot of uncertainty in its future with changes in diversions over to the Front Range, with climate change and everything else. And so a meaningful adaptive management program is going to be essential to account for the unanticipated changes to the system. All right, now what I was going to say. Given the recent press about the CRCC, we wanted to spend a little bit of time today talking about CPW's engagement in this project. However, to do that, we first have to take a step back to explain the Colorado River Headwaters Project. The Colorado River Headwaters Project is a regional ecosystem restoration effort spanning over 30 miles of the Colorado River. The project consists of 3 parts shown in orange, starting with the box on the right, is the ILVK projects, irrigators of lands in the vicinity of Kremling, and they're doing a bunch of work to improve irrigation, soil and water quality, and aquatic habitat. Then we have the Colorado Connectivity Channel, which we've discussed. And finally, on the left, you have the habitat project at Kent Breeze that's taking place at the Kent Breeze State Wildlife Area. The development of bringing these three projects together for the Headwaters project allowed the project partners to qualify for NRCS Regional Conservation Partnership Program funding for the CRCC projects and the ILVK projects. It's important to note here that the Habitat project at Kent Breeze is being funded independently of the other parts of the Headwaters project. So what does this mean? Why do we want to bring this up? The Headwaters, understanding the basis of the Headwaters project is important because CPW's contributions haven't just been limited to the CRCC itself, but have helped the entire Headwaters project. So far, CPW has contributed over 12,200 hours of staff resources toward the Headwaters project, including review of the CRCC design, as we discussed earlier, and engagement in the development of a monitoring and adaptive management program for the CRCC, monitoring, design, and implementation of the Habitat project at Kent Breeze, which rests solely on CPW shoulders, development and implementation of a monitoring plan for the Headwaters project as a whole, and included in that is the development and implementation of a fish movement study at the CRCC to verify that aquatic life can pass through the bypass channel. In addition, CPW has contributed $150,000 in cash toward the construction of the Habitat project at Kent Breeze. So though CPW has contributed extensive staff resources toward the Headwaters project and the CRCC specifically, CPW has not made a cash contribution toward the CRCC at this point. So with that background in mind, I'm going to hand it over to Jeremy to talk more about project funding and the project status.
So at this point, oh, you have to.
Sorry, apparently, yeah.
There we go. Sorry. At this point in time, the total project costs are estimated to be around $31.2 million. The partners expect that they have enough funds to cover the construction cost, but the channel and maintenance and adaptive management program remains largely unfunded. Funding maintenance and adaptive management will be critical to the long-term success of this project. So they have a contingency of $1.5 million, and there is some potential as far as needing with cost of diesel and whatnot that we might need more contingency money, but ultimately we're really looking at funding the adaptive management piece at this point in time. The good news with the project is the construction has started in the sense that they have cleared trees to make way for the new dam that will be in place, as well as the connectivity channel and the diversion structures that will be in place that allows water flow between Windy Gap Reservoir and the connectivity channel. And then currently they're also staging construction equipment and getting ready for project this summer to build the dam. And then next summer is plans for building the connectivity channel. And part of that, in these photos, show the drawdown process. So there's been a lot of fluctuations with the reservoir as they draw the reservoir down to prepare for the new construction. And with that, we'll open it up for any discussions, but I do want to express a huge amount of support and thanks to all of the CPW team that's listed on the slide who have contributed a significant amount of time and effort and brain power towards this project.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Garcia.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Let me begin by saying that you all on this commission know that this project is near and dear to my heart, and it's right next to my home. And I've talked about this project before. I've been working on this project for 2 decades. So I want to start by saying, you know, I thanked just about everybody in the division. But I hate to say this to the rest of you, but my favorite CPW wildlife officer is that gentleman sitting right there, Jeremy Huntington, because he's our guy. Okay. Grand County depends on Jeremy, and Jeremy does just one amazing, outstanding job. So Jeremy, thank you for all of your work.
Thank you.
As to the work on this channel, it is just one of the greatest things as a Trout Unlimited. I'm a lifetime sponsor. I'm a member of the Headwaters chapter of Trout Unlimited up in Grand County and a past member of the state board of Trout Unlimited. So I have been working with Trout Unlimited on various projects, and this one stands out. We have people in Trout Unlimited from all over the state that come to see all of this. It's not just as has been brought out by Carlin. It's not just this, it's downstream and all the work that we have been doing all the way through Kent Breeze and all of that. The Fraser River is the major first tributary coming into the Colorado River headwaters. The Colorado River, I don't need to tell you folks, is the most important river we have in this state. And one of the most important rivers in the entire country. And its lifeblood to agriculture and to all of our wildlife, not just in Colorado, but all the way to the Pacific Ocean. You know, when you talk about things, and Jeremy said one of the keys is adaptive management. We have learned in Grand County with working on the Fraser River and Denver water, we call it learning by doing. So no matter what you call it, it's taking care of something once you have done the hard work. The work doesn't stop. There's a lot of work to follow. And whether you call it learning by doing or adaptive management, that is a huge key. The health of this river is so important that I would hope this matter is going to come before this commission at some point, I hope in the near future, for a vote. And I would ask you and encourage you to vote yes on this project. This is extremely important. I remember I told you when I talked to you a long time ago about this project, there was a fellow, Bud Isaacs, and there was a book called Oil and Water. Bud Isaacs unfortunately passed away earlier this year. And I've talked to Carlin, and it sounds like there may be an attempt to put a plaque of some kind to honor the work he did to bring this connectivity channel to life. But it is so important. I ask that you do that. I would one other thing, and that is I would ask Trout Unlimited while I'm on the public mic to never, ever again talk about this channel without recognizing the work of CPW. I frankly have been disappointed in TU on occasion recently when they have talked about all the work they've done. It did not shout out the work that CPW has done, because without CPW, this matter would not be before you today. It would not be happening without CPW. So thank you, CPW. And then I get to make a personal plug, right, Jeremy? Trout Unlimited Headwaters Dinner will be July 18th at the Headwaters Center in Winter Park. You can go on our website and buy tickets, and we invite you all to come and help support this great work that we're doing in Grand County. So to the two of you and to all of the people, John Ewart, Lori Martin, all of the other people in CPW, thank you for all the work you've done.
Thank you, Commissioner Garcia. Commissioner Touchton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, just three quick things. First, thank you for all your work on this. And I encourage you to, it sounds like we're getting really close to the end line. We got to push it across. I think it would be the best going away present for Commissioner Garcia that we could possibly accomplish. Much better probably than a metal sculpture. Real quick, you had mentioned that you thought this might be the first connectivity channel. And I am aware of another one on the Yellowstone River at Glendive, Montana, that was built by the Army Corps of Engineers just maybe within the last 4 years. And so if you wanted to, they did an EIS that was like, so if you're looking for design tips or something like that, they may have feedback by now from what worked or not. So it's on, you'd have to contact the Corps and see what they've learned. And then the other thing, this is just, I was very curious. You mentioned that the dam was causing increases in temperature downstream. It was bad for the aquatic ecosystem. And what I was wondering was, in my understanding, most times dams let water out at the bottom and it's colder. So what I was concerned about, when I was thinking about that, was either this dam lets over the top, and I wouldn't know that, but that it's not actually the dam, but it's a shortage of water. And so I wondered how we're going to fix those temperature problems. If it's, something that if lack of water is the problem, I don't know that this will be the silver bullet. So I just was concerned, and maybe you could speak to that.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Commissioner Touchton. Also on the note on the EIS, I appreciate that. As far as I understand it, the reservoir, even though the water on the bottom is cooler, is still warmer than the river water would otherwise be. And yes, decreased flows in the Colorado River will continue to be an issue for temperature. Running as much water as we can through the connectivity channel instead of running it through the reservoir should help offset the impacts of temperature, but the reservoir is still there and it will still continue to be a balancing act in perpetuity and is going to be fodder of long discussions as part of the project operations plan to make sure we're balancing water quality needs with the operations of the channel.
Commissioner Garcia.
Also, and Jeremy, correct me if I'm wrong, the water that comes out of Granby Reservoir, for instance, which comes back into the Colorado River, is extremely cold because it's coming up 400-foot reservoir. I mean, that reservoir is 400, 500 feet deep. That is ice cold water coming out of there. Windy Gap Reservoir is a mud puddle. So you don't get very cold water in most mud puddles I know. And so that's what you're getting coming out of Windy Gap Reservoir. It's not a deep water. You saw in the pictures, it's a mud puddle.
Okay, I think that covers this item. I would also just chime in and say, as a longtime member of the American Rivers Board, toured this site, and I know that American Rivers has also been a partner. So it's nice to see all these things come together and make some sense. And I believe we will see this come back to us. So, sorry, Commissioner Adams.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As you may recall, I had the opportunity of doing a tour last month or in April, of this area, and it was absolutely tremendous. And I just wanted to circle back to the water plan that was discussed yesterday. And as I brought up the need and opportunity for education, particularly on the Front Range, around just where water comes from and all of these pieces, because and the impact of increased outdoor recreation, et cetera. Not to mention the agriculture. Again, when we talk about these, it tends to be in these silos, or we all kind of know about it. But when I ask people, my neighbors, they don't know about it, but they are impacting, right? Just by drinking water and eating food, regardless of whether they actually fish or do any of the outdoor recreation components. So again, really just appreciate the continued work, and am hopeful that we can increase public awareness, particularly on the Front Range, around just these water impacts and the day-to-day impacts and opportunities that we have to be better stewards of the water that we received on the front slope. So thank you.
Okay, I think that now concludes this item. Thank you for all the great work for the presentation. Okay, so we will circle back or circle to item number 25, and I'll turn this to Jake Matter for our results. And then we'll do a couple housekeeping items, and that's what we'll do. Okay, Jake, go ahead.
For the record, Commissioner Hauser, the minutes will reflect your continued service as the chair for next year, as well as Commissioner Haskett serving as secretary. I'll be sure that that's mentioned in the minutes. The chair notes indicate that if a candidate, with respect to the vice chair position, if a candidate gets a simple majority of over 50% in round one, the election is complete and the person with the most votes in round one wins. That occurred. We had Commissioner May receiving over 50% of the vote. So let me be the first to congratulate you.
Congratulations, Commissioner May, or condolences. I don't know which one. Congratulations. And thank you. Yeah. And I also want to recognize Commissioners Blecka and Adams for participating and for your comments today as well, and hope that we have great opportunities for both of your leadership, continued opportunities for both of your leadership. And would, on that note, would just remind, now that we've been through this, that we will sometime between now and July determine the next GOCO member. And just as a point of sort of protocol, if that's not quote contested, it just happens. It doesn't come to this commission. So I think that's being worked out. And then there are the other opportunities that we mentioned. So if you have an interest in either continuing to serve or serve on the Natural Areas Council, please maybe direct those to Heather or Laura. The Trails Committee as well. I don't know what the cycle on that is, Commissioner Blecka, so we'll just check that and see if it's perpetual or if there's some term on that, and we'll get back to you on that. And then if there's interest in the Finance Committee, if you could please let Laura or Heather know. And in particular, if you're interested in chairing that committee, I'm sure Commissioner Garcia would give you lots of tips. So, and then also on WAFWA, if you're interested in WAFWA, please raise your hand on that. And we'll, if there's more than we have financing for, we'll just try to figure out who goes in January, and we'll try to make sure we distribute that opportunity. I have a couple of quick housekeeping items for us, and then I do want to turn it over to our departing commissioners for any final comments from them. Laura has reminded us that it is the end of the fiscal year, so please get your expenses in promptly so that she can get you reimbursed for this meeting. Just a very quick comment about the July meeting. We talked about this a little bit in May. Right now, the very broad outline, so you can just have it in the back of your mind, is that there would be an optional site visit to Sylvan Lake on the Wednesday prior to our meeting. If you want to come over early and see that. New Visitor Center, as you'll recall, there was a significant fire there as well. And so interesting opportunities to see that park. So we'll make that option available. And then Thursday, we're working on a collaborative event with the GOCO board, which would include some opportunity to bring some of the GOCO board members who attend to our meeting, hopefully for sort of an overview. Dan's in the back. We visited a little bit about this last night. Probably have an opportunity to invite the county commissioners from both Eagle and Garfield, who I think would value and appreciate an audience with the commission. And then we're figuring out all the details for a visit up to Sweetwater Lake, which hopefully Travis will figure out where that will occur. There are buildings that are not habitable right now, and it's just a little bit of a we will figure something out to see Sweetwater Lake while we're close, and then we'll have our balance of our meeting on Friday. So just so you can plan a little bit on that. The other things that just to keep in mind. Commissioner Phillips mentioned the kind of work session for allocations. We will try to do that fairly promptly and probably send out a doodle poll. We can probably do that virtually. So look for that sometime in the near future. And then also we will likely need a December meeting on the wolf restoration process. And I think we would lean towards a virtual because it will maximize the opportunity for public comment. So unless you have really strong feelings otherwise, particularly in that month with weather and all that, it just would enable more folks to participate in a virtual format. Okay, I don't see any major issues with that. We'll come back to Brett at the very end for the site visit logistics. I suspect others will join me in this. I just want to genuinely thank the two gentlemen to my left for their service on this commission and as officers. Just by virtue of that expression of ovation, I suspect I'm joined in these sentiments. I personally know how much lobbying went to the governor's office to reappoint both Commissioners Garcia and Schaefer, and I think I'm maybe joined by many that it's unfortunate that that won't occur. And there's lots of reasons for that, that's the way the world works. But these are two incredibly experienced individuals. They bring a lot to the table. We don't always have to agree or otherwise. And you also know, I think we always know they are come absolutely prepared and their background and their experiences have contributed greatly. I have learned personally a great deal from both of them. They've been great partners as officers, although I will say it is very difficult to partner in the officer world because of the open meetings restrictions. So we actually don't chat very much in between meetings, but I just want to recognize them, and I would open the floor to anyone else other than the two of them because they will get the last word. So if anyone else would like to say anything, we will get to celebrate both of them, by the way, at a future meeting. So we'll invite them back. I think Commissioner Garcia is looking at July, so we won't miss him for too long. And then Commissioner Schaefer's picking where he'd like to join us. So if there's anyone else that would like to make a quick comment, I would certainly open the floor. Commissioner Blecka.
Yeah, I'll just say thank you for your leadership. As you know, I came in very alone. I sat next to Luke at my first meeting, but it's been great. Learned so much from you guys, and I look forward to seeing you down the road. So thank you.
Okay, Commissioner May.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Losing these two gentlemen will leave. Losing one of them would have been hard. Losing them both, I don't know how we'll fill that void, but I can assure you this agency and commission will move forward in one form or another. We'll move forward. It may not be as efficiently as we could have with their presence, but we'll move forward. And I could not appreciate them more than I do what they bring.
Commissioner Phillips.
Yeah, Charlie and Luke, you guys have been a huge asset, I think, to this commission and to me personally. It's going to look very different without you guys around, but thank you for everything.
Commissioner Haskett.
Thank you. I want to thank both of you. I am going to miss you. We are all going to miss you. I'm really sad that you are not going to be reappointed. It's going to look a little different not having the two other hunters in this on the commission, and what that's going to look like in the future. So thank you both, and we'll see you in Craig, I hope.
And hopefully they'll still be around for the newer hunters among us, right, to teach us. Commissioner Barty.
I'm really going to miss the two of you. Being in the same cohort as you starting together, it's just really been a gift, and I'm so grateful for everything I've learned from you and for our friendship. Charlie could always count on you commenting on everything. And each time there was a gem in it, and I'm really going to miss that and really appreciate it. And Luke, every single time that you made a comment, it was profound and meaningful. And I think you really shaped the direction and the place where we're going and where we've come in the last couple of years. I'm really going to miss you. Thank you both so much.
Commissioner Schaefer may not even be old enough to know the E.F. Hutton comment, but he is a little bit of an E.F. Hutton, right? He speaks and we all listen. Commissioner Touchton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Others have said it better than I could, but I really appreciate your service. As someone said, I can tell you guys are always well prepared and you live it. I think you'll continue to do what you do with or without a official title, because I know it's your personal passions and important to you. So I look forward to seeing you around and continuing to try to do the best we can for wildlife and our lands. So, but thank you very much for your service. It's motivational to see people who've dedicated so much to this agency and our wildlife.
Thank you, Commissioner Adams.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just want to echo the comments of appreciation. I know we always didn't get along on every single issue or topic, but it makes the work better. And I'm a better person for having gone through that. And so I'm thankful for the perspectives, the expertise, and the strength, the integrity, the commitment to the mission. Thank you.
Hold on, Commissioner Garcia. I'm going to go to Commissioner Bailey first, and then Director Dugan, and then you two get the last word.
All right, thanks so much. Yeah, I just wanted to echo what's already been said and acknowledge your shared and distinct experience and expertise and how much nuance you brought with your comments, with your perspective, with your values that has really improved my experience and my time here and given me so much to think about, reflect on, and process. And I think has really set me up for a better service as a commissioner. So thank you for your comments and your words and your perspectives.
Thank you, Acting Director Dugan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to thank both of you for the deep conversations that we have had at various times. Commissioner Garcia, that goes back a couple of years, and I really do appreciate your perspective. And we have not always agreed on everything, but I would like to echo Commissioner Adams. It has made me a better person because I can look at things through your lens and see where you're coming from. And I really appreciate that. And it's been more recent, Commissioner Schaefer, that you and I have had conversations like that. But I got to tell you, I just really, really enjoy what we've talked about. And I hope to see you around so that we can continue some of those. So thank you both for your service. You've made CPW better. You've added on to our history. And I want to thank you for that.
Okay, drum roll. Commissioner Garcia first, and then Commissioner Schaefer gets the last word.
So I indicated I'm going to save my real farewell for July, but I just wanted to comment on what Commissioner May said, that this commission will continue to do the great work. Somehow it managed to do the great work for 121 years before we came. I don't know how you did it, but it tells me that this agency is going to continue to do the great work as we leave and forever. So thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Garcia. Commissioner Schaefer.
All right, well, I'm going to be a little less verbose than my fellow departing member here. First, I just want to say a couple things. I really enjoyed my time here, working with everyone on the commission. I think there's a variety of perspectives that are necessary. This is the great melting pot of those perspectives. And I think that, the important aspect of having those various perspectives is employing empathy, and being able to understand that you might not have any relevant experience of something, but you have the ability to put yourself in the shoes of another person and take a pause and try and see where they're coming from. I think that, that is something that this commission needs to continue to endeavor to do, in order to, be able to do the work that is necessary. And the work that is necessary is going to be a great deal of change. We've already seen, a constant change over the last few decades. Whether you're going back to just the merger, but it's a changing dynamic everywhere. And that is something that is hard. Change is difficult. I'm talking as a guy who lived in Moffat County for 2 decades because it doesn't change. But it brings good with it. It just, it's a struggle. You got to fight. And you have to be intentional in trying to work through it to get to the outcome. And so I think that is something that I think the commission is charged with and needs to continue to endeavor to do. The big thing I want to impart is staff, you do thankless jobs. And it's one where you're never going to be thanked for it. You hear some platitudes in a meeting here and there, but the day-to-day, the willingness for some folks to, put in 17-hour days for weeks on end, to meet a mission that is only growing more complex on a daily basis. I just want you to know, those of us that are up here and so many more that are either listening or not listening right now, appreciate it. It is one where you're safeguarding the things that I love most in my life. And that is something that I don't take for granted. It takes a great deal of work to meet the moment that you're constantly faced with. And so, in part of the changes that I think that the commission need to undertake and endeavor to advocate for, we have got to put staff first. We have got to not just retain the important talent that we have. We have got to continue to endeavor to make this the premier destination for everyone within the fields that fall within CPW, which is almost everything at this point. Because without that talent, we will not meet the moment. We will end up having protracted challenges because it is through the hard work and dedication of staff that we are able to deal with these extremely complex issues. And, I think do them rather well, given the fact that, most of these challenges are existential in nature. And so I want to make certain that you all understand that. Outside of that, I'll take back my time on a monthly basis, do a little bit more hunting and fishing, the things I enjoy. But I greatly appreciate all the kind words. And I greatly appreciate everyone's investment in this agency as well as myself. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. Well said by both of you. And again, we will get an opportunity to celebrate both of them. Final couple quick items. Always thank you to our IT team for all that you do, and obviously all the staff and everyone that brings us together. There's lots of, to Commissioner Schaefer's point, there's so much that happens behind the scenes to bring us together. So thank you for making sure we're accessible to the public as well. Very importantly, there are box lunches in the dining room area for commissioners and those that are going on the site visit. You can grab one of those. And final, unless there's anything else I'm missing, Brett will tell us what we're doing for those that are going on the excursion this afternoon. And thank you otherwise for a great meeting.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for bringing the commission to the Southeast region. Our final outing will be an OHV tour, which is the chair and staff thought was apropos as you took a look at OHV grants this cycle, that we would take you on a bit of an OHV tour this afternoon. As the chair mentioned, Laura, we've got some lunches ready in the same location the breakfast was held. Is that correct? And so you'll have an opportunity to grab that lunch and to check out. And Madam Chair, it is now 12:03. If we were to meet at 12:40, would that 12:45? Would that give people enough time to check out? And is that okay? Okay. Why don't we do 12:40 for a 12:45 departure out in front of the hotel, the same place that we met for the tour yesterday. And if you wouldn't mind, if I can see a show of hands for those commissioners that will be attending, so we make sure we don't leave anyone behind. All right, thank you so much. We'll see you there. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, Laura gets the last word.
Just for clarification, there's box lunches for leadership team, all the commissioners and staff that presented today, not just the tour people.
Sorry, that wasn't clear. Just was making sure those that were going would do that fairly quickly. So anyway, I think the hotel is expecting our checkout fairly quickly. So thanks everybody, and we'll see you in July.